Welcome to 1987. What does the new year bring? We're still in the boom, but we're on the backside of that explosion. So we're not going to have a situation like the holidays of 1986 where 3/4 of the games are among the worst on the system. Mappers become cheap enough that they're commonly used, spelling the doom for the Famicom disk system. The ludicrous password system in one of the most popular games ever released spurs on the development of battery saving. And of course, we're going to see the launches of some big franchises. But first we have Tori, Gaou no Bouken, or Phoenix, Gaou's Adventure. Tori is one of the most mature works from legendary comic creator Osamu Tezuka. I don't think I could even summarize it properly in the time given for this video. It's not a coherent series. It's more of a collection of stories linked thematically that Tezuka worked on for his entire career. At their core, they're all about cycles of death and rebirth, as well as Tezuka's own relationship with his Buddhist faith. So it's the perfect subject matter for an action platformer. The story in the Famicom game is very loosely adapted from the arc that's been called Karma in English releases. In the game, Gaou is a former bandit-turned-monk who carved the figure of the Phoenix. It was stolen and broken into 16 pieces, and now he's out to reassemble them. That shares almost no similarities with the comic, and there's other changes. Gaou in the comic is notable for only having one arm. In fact, that's kind of central to the story. In the game, however, he's got 2 arms, presumably because they just wanted to flip the sprite when you change directions. On his travels, Gaou defends himself by throwing chisels. He can toss those straight ahead or upward. But Gao's real strength lies in sculpture. By pressing down and attacking, he creates an onigawara. That's a decorative roof tile shaped like a monster. If you crouch and attack, Gaou places this right in front of himself. If he's in the air, then he places the block directly underneath himself. Gaou's not very athletic, so you have to use onigawara to get to high places. You have a limited supply of blocks you can place, but hitting an enemy with a chisel turns them into one. Those blocks slide along until they hit a surface and then solidify. But you can collect it, or you can shoot it again to make it rebound back at you. If a block is placed in an inconvenient spot, you can destroy it by throwing a chisel at it, or you can crouch and press jump 3 times to destroy it. You'll encounter treasure chests as well. They have to be shot to open, and since you can't crouch to shoot, you'll often have to get down a level to hit them. That can be another use for the onigawara, where you might want to drop off a ledge and then drop one below you so that you can hit a treasure chest. One challenge to the treasure chests is that sometimes they'll just drop out of the sky, and you have to strike them on the way down. Inside the treasure chest you can find a money bag that's only worth some points. This shell that extends your life bar by 1 spot up to a maximum of 8. The effects of the shell last until you die. Then your life bar goes back to normal. A rice ball which fully replenishes your life. A red onigawara that gives you 10 more blocks. A magatama that freezes time. A phoenix feather that makes you invincible for a short time. And a mirror that will let you walk through anything. Both invincibility items last for an extremely short period, only about 10 seconds. There's a real danger with the mirror, because you can get trapped inside certain areas. If that occurs, you have to press select to kill yourself. Let's talk about the enemies for a minute. They're all real pains. Spawning seems to be based on how far on the screen you've advanced, and that means when you stand in some spots, they just keep coming forever. Since there's no low attack, that can fill up an area with things you can't hit. The snakes and fish are especially bad about this. Two things can happen at the end of the stage. You might see the piece of the phoenix carving sitting out in the open. In that case, there's usually an obstacle you have to deal with, like these moai heads destroying all of the terrain in the area. Or you could encounter some bosses. I'd love to give you some tips on them, but really all you have to do is get in their face and fire as fast as possible. Even with a default life bar, you won't have any trouble with them. If you manage to defeat Stage 7, then you go back to Stage 1. The reason for this is Tori takes place in 3 different time periods. Gaou has to locate doorways between each of them. And these doors are not always easy to make out. They're often hidden behind destructible terrain, and even when you uncover one, it can be difficult to tell that it's a door. The worst aspect of this is that there's one stage that's accessible by only one warp. So you have to find this warp zone in order to complete the game. And finding those hidden warps is really the only challenge in Tori. It's not a difficult game, and there's infinite continues. If you knew about the existence of the warps, it would only take you about an hour to beat it from the first time you played it. This is a game with an absolutely incredible presentation and so-so actual gameplay. It looks and sounds amazing, but the actual platforming, the way you use Onigawara, the way that enemies and treasure chests spawn, they don't measure up to the spectacular presentation. Tori doesn't play badly. This is a Konami game after all. In terms of gameplay, it's just fine. This is a game that isn't too difficult to beat. It's okay to play, but I also feel like once you've beaten it, you wouldn't think about it again. There's no accounting for taste. Dragon Buster is a beloved game in Japan, hailed as an all-time classic by their retro game fans, and it's absolutely terrible. I did manage to find a few Japanese players who hate the game, but they're rare. Dragon Buster was originally an arcade game from very early in 1985, so it's about 2 years old when it came to the Famicom. The arcade game is described as an RPG, though it's one of those cases where it's called an RPG because of the sword and sorcery theme rather than the gameplay. The Famicom version, on the other hand, actually has some very slight RPG elements. In the arcade, killing enemies just gives you score, but in the Famicom version, you get experience points. And you do get stronger with about every 10,000 experience you earn. Naturally, the story for this game is that you're a knight, and there's a princess that's been kidnapped by a dragon. Or dragons. And princesses. Because there's a dragon at the end of every stage, and every 3 stages, there's another princess you rescue. You start out on this overworld map, where you can choose your path through the area, and each of those spots are dungeons that you have to explore. The dungeons consist of these long corridors that have big rooms, and in every big room, there's a special monster that you have to defeat in order to continue. Defeating that monster also makes an item appear, or if it's the final room of the dungeon, then an exit shows up. There isn't a huge variety of those mini-boss enemies. Once you've seen Fafnir, the small dragon, the skeleton, the wizard, and the bishop, then you've seen everything. And speaking of fighting, that brings me to the first utterly disastrous thing about Dragon Buster: the controls. The B button swings your sword. That's the easy one. Pressing the A button while moving left or right or standing still jumps. And while you're in the air, you can press down and B to stick out your sword. This is by far the most powerful and effective attack in the game. One problem with it, though: if you get touched by anything, you go flying in kind of a tumbling motion. That will knock you out of your sword chop, But even worse, there's no invulnerability frames, and the knockback tends to knock you into other things, so you can wind up spinning around in a circle for quite a while. But you can still swing your sword while flailing, and that might be enough to knock you clear of the damage area. If you double tap in a direction, you'll run, sometimes. The double tap actions have a very tight window, and as a result they don't work very well. That includes the double jump. To pull it off, you have to jump a second time while you're going up. So in other words, you'd have to jump immediately after you jump, double tapping. Platforming in this game is a nightmare. Sometimes the double jump just doesn't work and you'll fall. Sometimes you're not aligned quite right and you'll fall. And sometimes the game just hates you and you'll fall. Many of the items you'll get from mini-bosses are one-use magical attacks. You pick which one you're going to use by pressing Start to bring up the inventory. To use one, you have to press down and jump. And if this is something you can do in the air, I never managed to pull it off. Different enemies have different weaknesses, but really you shouldn't be afraid to use those items. There's only 2 of them that are any good against the dragon at the end of the stage, and the key strategy in Dragon Buster is stop loss, minimizing the amount of damage you take as you go through the stages. So if you're down a little bit, use those spells up. It's good for you. The items that you can use that I encountered are the scrolls, which shoot fireballs, the staves, which shoot lightning bolts, the lamp, which makes pillars of flame, and is one of the 2 items that will actually hit a dragon, the necklace, which turns all enemies on screen into stone, and the grail, which automatically completes the dungeon you're in. Completing a dungeon is one of the few ways that you can recover health, so unless there's an item you absolutely have to get out of that dungeon, use that grail just as soon as you enter a dungeon. There's a few other items that can appear. Gems just give you some experience points. The blue potion recovers health. They're not very common though. And the orange potion is poison. There's also a few items that persist in your inventory. The shield reduces damage for a little while. The compass always points to where the exit in a dungeon is. One problem with that, dungeons loop horizontally and vertically. That makes mapping the larger ones a pain, and it makes the compass not particularly useful. The medical herb will refill your life bar when you reach 0. The gem will make a rainbow bridge appear so that you can cross over spots you've completed and backtrack in the stage. The key and axe are used automatically in the overworld map to clear a path for you. And finally there's the diary, which I couldn't find despite my best hunting. It's actually the most important item too. The reason why is that it's the only way that you can continue the game. There's 12 stages in Dragon Buster, and it's brutally hard. But if you can find a diary, then you can always continue from that stage. The last region you can reach on the overworld is always the dragon. There's no dungeon, just the dragon. And you have to hit it in the head and neck to defeat it. They're often up and out of your way too. Closing the distance when it's constantly breathing fire is tricky, but it's the only option. Once you're in close, swing like a madman. I can think of 3 possibilities why Dragon Buster is popular in Japan. First, if you complete all 12 stages, there's a Zelda-style second quest. On that one, when you rescue a princess, she's wearing a bathing suit. The second thing I can think of is the gold cart. Of course, that gold coloring had a tendency to wear off. The final thing is that the promotional poster for the arcade game is spectacular. Just look at it. If I was the kind of person who made YouTube videos with themselves sitting in front of a wall of nerd stuff, I'd want that poster behind me. No matter how painful I find Dragon Buster to play, it was still popular enough to get a sequel. The sequel's far less popular in Japan, though I actually think it's better. I find it's actually playable, for one thing. For the original Dragon Buster, though, nothing in this game really works right. The combat's terrible because you just get bounced around all the time. The enemies aren't any fun because of how random they are. The way the screen scrolls means that things are often on top of you before you can react. And the risk-reward balance for the dungeons is all out of whack. The optimal strategy is to not get anything. Really, there's no getting around that Dragon Buster is a bad game, no matter what retro fans in Japan may say. Labyrinth is another case where the pieces are all there for a decent game, but it never really comes together. I'm going to say some things about this that'll make you go, oh, that sounds interesting. I assure you those aspects of the game are far less interesting as you play it. Naturally, Labyrinth is based on the Jim Henson movie, and you can actually see the outlines of the plot in it. In a moment of pique, Sarah said to her baby brother, "I hope the Goblin King takes you away," and those magic words summoned David Bowie. Sarah wants to get her baby brother back, so she has 13 hours to navigate the maze before his castle, and then confront David Bowie to recover her brother. Now, if I've been keeping track correctly, this is the first Famicom game from Atlas. They're going to be developers for hire for a long time, but they will publish a couple of their own games before we're done. The credits at the beginning mention Activision, but they weren't involved with this. They published the text-adventure computer game, and it seems like this is just a licensing agreement. This game is an overhead shooter where you're controlling Sarah directly. She has a long-range attack that takes out monsters, and instead of having lives or a health bar, when she gets hit she loses time. You start with 13 hours, which is really about 26 minutes, and contact with enemies can drain that away pretty quickly. But there's ways to recover time. Lipstick gives you an hour back. Watches give you 3 hours. The books, which have to be used from your inventory, give you 5 hours back. And you can buy time from the wise man at the center of the hedge maze. We'll get back to him in a moment. You earn money by collecting treasures or by killing enemies, and you use it to buy more time from the wise man, or you can purchase items from the worm. The real goal of the game is to get 12 parts of a key that will unlock David Bowie's castle. The keys are scattered throughout the individual mazes of the labyrinth, and you'll have to find the correct paths to each of them. Also, each area in the labyrinth has 1 coin. If you get 3 of those and talk to the wise man, you'll upgrade your attack and defense. You begin outside the labyrinth, and your first goal is to find out how to get in. There are many ways to open the door, and some of them give you better rewards. Of course, there's nothing in the game to tell you how to open the door. Then after talking to a worm in an infinite corridor, and navigating a small stone maze, you reach the hedge maze, which is the heart of the game. It's a maze full of teleporters that will put you in spots that look identical to where you are. The key is the wise man at the center. He can restore your time, but also after you talk to him, he tells you where the next key is located. This is actually tricky even if you speak a bit of Japanese, since he uses some pretty archaic terms when giving directions. If you exit that center area in the right way, then you're teleported to the next labyrinth map. Now, based on what happened initially, I was expecting Labyrinth to be a lot more puzzle-like. And it's not. After those initial sections, you wind up just walking through areas, shooting up enemies, and sticking to the path until you reach the key. It doesn't take long until it stops feeling like a labyrinth and just more like a regular shooter. There's only one more thing to talk about in this game, and that's the companions. You'll find these hearts from time to time, and when you collect one, you can assign it to one of your 3 companions. Once they have 3, they'll appear to help you. You can also summon them with the music box if you've already given them 3 hearts. The companion usually shadows you, but you can control them a little bit by pressing the B button, which halts them in their tracks. The best thing I can say about Labyrinth is that the game does a reasonable job of representing the movie. You can kind of tell which scenes certain areas are supposed to be, but beyond that, it just comes up short. It feels like there should be a bit more adventure and puzzle solving, given the theme. And the action that it's relying on isn't that great. I'm not sure why they constantly teleport you back to the hedge maze, only to be teleported right back out again. It would feel better if it was continuous. It would feel more like progress through the labyrinth. In the end, this is just a mediocre game. Not bad enough to hate, and yet nothing really good in it either. I've reached 1987 in my Famicom Disk System playthrough, and you really could consider 1987 to be the year of the FDS. It's the year with the highest number of releases, and we're going to see some great games, but there's a bit of a twist here. The Disk System is actually already past its prime. Almost every big Famicom Disk System release that people think of has already happened. And we'll be seeing a really sharp slowdown in the pace of releases even by the end of 1987. Kicking things off for the peak of the Disk System is a significant experiment of a game. Just 11 months after Zelda no Densetsu, we've got The Legend of Zelda 2, and yes, it's titled in English, Link no Bouken. Zelda no Densetsu was a launch title for the Disk System, the big must-own game that the platform launched with. It built on the nascent action puzzler genre and turned it into something that was very accessible for people, which naturally meant when it was time for a sequel, they changed everything. I want to start at the ending because I think it's important for context. I find Link no Bouken to be an interesting game with a lot of clever systems that don't quite gel together. So I'm going to sound a bit down on the game, but it's not because I hate it. I might put it down as the best of the second-tier games. There's a lot to like here, and that makes it more disappointing when you run into the stuff that doesn't quite work. The plot of the game immediately follows up the previous one, making this the final game where the Zelda timeline will be coherent and make sense. After killing Ganon, Link hears about another Princess Zelda, this one trapped in an eternal slumber like Sleeping Beauty. And since his whole thing is saving Zeldas, he's going to go get the things that will let him access the hidden location of the third Triforce, which will then be used to wake the Princess Zelda up. All of that story is presented in English in the introduction, though it could use an editing pass. This is an early sign that Nintendo was looking at international markets with these games. The Legend of Zelda 2 is being prepared to be sold in the US alongside Japan. The obvious change in Link no Bouken is that the action now takes place from a side view. Naturally, that changes the gameplay elements quite a bit. There's a lot of platforming in Link no Bouken. You're gonna have to jump around all over the place. There's 7 palaces that you'll have to explore like this, corresponding towns for each of them, plus dozens of smaller locations that you'll find by exploring the vast world. You'll do that from an overhead view, and as you're walking around, if you get off the road, then monsters will appear and run around. In the Disk System version, they appear as those blobs. The yellow blobs are the weak ones, blue blobs are the tough ones, and red blobs are fairies. Snatching up a fairy when you encounter one restores Link's health. The other notable change in Link no Bouken is that the game is now an RPG. In the original Zelda no Densetsu, and in most Zelda games afterwards, the only character feature that you could permanently increase was Link's health. In Link no Bouken, however, you get experience points for defeating enemies, and when you reach a threshold, you level up and can increase a stat. You can increase your attack to do more damage, your life, which is actually your defense, or your magic, which helps bring down the cost of magic spells. Magic is also the stat that's probably going to be your lowest priority to increase, since the magic system in Link no Bouken is one of the game's biggest weaknesses. Every town has a magic spell that you can acquire, usually by finding an item somewhere out in the world and bringing it back to somebody. If you wind up in the town first, you'll talk to them and they'll tell you what they're looking for, but if you're fully exploring, it's pretty likely that you've already come across what they want. You go into their house when they open the door, and meet an old wizard who will add a spell to your list. You access the list on your status screen by hitting Start, select a spell, and then cast it by pressing Select. You have a magic bar at the top, and each block in it represents 16 bits of magic. And the number next to the spell on the status screen is how much it costs to cast that spell. Leveling up your magic brings that cost down sometimes, for some spells. The cost of magic doesn't really scale linearly with any of them, and some spells just stop decreasing in cost altogether at a point. And because the cost of magic doesn't line up with the blocks, it winds up feeling like buying currency in a mobile game, where you can't ever just get the amount that you need. If an enemy drops a blue potion, it'll refill one block, and a red potion will refill your entire bar. Because it takes a while for the red potion to fill up the bar, you can pick up the potion, cast a spell, and then have the red potion refill that block you just spent. Red potions are also often found in statues in the temples, which makes them useful for recovery. Other things you can find just sitting around in the world include heart containers that extend your life bar one block, magic containers which do the same thing for your magic bar, and little dolls that act as extra lives, because Link now has lives. If you run out of lives and get a game over, then something happens to your levels. Everything gets flattened out. Between attack, magic, and life, whichever one was your lowest is what all three stats are now equal to. The cost to level them back up also gets reduced, as though you are just at that total level, but it can still be a pretty major setback. You'll probably want to prioritize upgrading your attack. As in most games, destroying enemies faster is more effective than any defensive option. And as for magic, it's just not really super useful until you find the healing spell. One other consideration when choosing what to level up is that increasing your magic or life fully restores those bars for you. That's something that you can take advantage of. In fact, there's a lot of strategies that you can apply here to maximize your experience gains and make your leveling extra effective. Link no Bouken is a huge game. When I recorded previous episodes on Zelda no Densetsu, I completed the whole game in about 2 hours. I stopped my recording on this one at about an hour and a half. That was when I had gotten my first game over in the second temple, though I had moved a lot further than that and double-backed. There's also a surprising amount of flexibility in Link no Bouken. While Link starts out his adventure with nothing but his sword, there's a lot of things you can do without really progressing the game. In fact, one of the major strategies for dealing with the absurdly difficult endgame is to intentionally bypass a lot of the early stuff so that you can collect it at the end when it's more effective. For example, you don't have a candle at the start of the game which you need to light dark caves. But the early caves have a pretty simple layout, and the number of enemies are both small, and they do enough overlapping of the graphics that you can see, and it's not especially difficult to make your way through them without a light source. Then you can collect some spells and permanent upgrades, plus do some leveling, before you make any progress in the quest. Now, I didn't do that while I was recording, because I kind of wanted to present the game as it's normally played, but I still kind of wound up doing some of that. Here's what I did during my hour-and-a-half recording session. I set out from the temple, which you always return to when you start playing. Another quirk that becomes annoying when you get a game over when you're really far from it. I went to the starting town where I got the shield magic that cuts all damage in half, at least until you exit the screen that you're on. Got the first heart container, which is conveniently located near the first temple. Cleared out that first temple, getting the candle in the process. Picked up the magic container and idol, then turned the idol in for jump magic, which doubles your jump height. Made my way through the cave system to the swamps, but instead of heading around to the swamp temple, I headed south across the river to get the healing magic, and then went through the maze of caves that always gave you a problem when you were a kid, to get the hammer at the end, one of the few items usable on the overhead map, where it smashes rocks to clear paths. I picked up the other magic container that was sitting right there, headed over to the desert town where I learned to stab down while jumping, and also picked up fairy magic. Then it was off to the swamp palace, which I mostly made my way through, until I fell into a pit just a couple screens short of the boss. I was kind of hoping I'd get through the next temple before I had to stop, but a game over there meant I'd have to redo about 10 or 15 minutes, and that pushed pretty hard on my recording time. One quirk about the Famicom Disk System version is that the only way to pick something up is by stabbing it. This means that even though I got the fairy magic early, and could thus fly through a keyhole, I couldn't collect what was on the other side. Oh well, so it goes. Needless to say, Link no Bouken was very popular in Japan. In fact, it was the highest reviewed game ever in Famitsu magazine, until 2 weeks later when Dragon Quest II came out. The game is still very popular in Japan. While Nintendo has re-released it a few times, they never really went back to this style of game with the Zelda series. Maybe they felt like they locked on to a winning formula with the next one. There are a few things worth mentioning about the differences between the Famicom Disk System version of Link no Bouken and the cartridge version of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. You see, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link is a bigger game than Link no Bouken. This is the first time where we're really seeing games bump into the limitations of the disk system. All of the temples use the exact same graphics in the disk system version. For example, there wasn't any room for different styles of floors and pillars. And the cartridge has additional enemies and bosses. The disk system winds up repeating some. However, they also increase the difficulty for the cartridge version. Enemies do more damage, attack more aggressively, and it costs more to level yourself up. So Link no Bouken is easier to play, but the Adventure of Link is a more complete experience. I've already given my conclusion, and I could go deeper onto certain aspects of the game that I don't care for, but I feel like there isn't really a need for it. The best thing that I can say here is that I was thinking that after I finish editing this one, maybe I'll go back and play a bit more. I still had another hour or two of play before I felt like the game turned really nasty. There's a lot to like in Link no Bouken. It just doesn't quite live up to being a classic. I feel like I'm going to give this speech a dozen times before this project is over, but my chosen format really doesn't work well with certain things. Creating daily videos doesn't mesh well with long games that have similar gameplay throughout. So RPGs and strategy games are going to get the short end of the stick with this. Usually I have enough time to record about an hour of footage that I then edit down. But for these 8-bit RPGs, the first hour of gameplay is going to be grinding out levels right around the starting area. Which is why I played about 3 hours of Dragon Quest II. And even with that, I've barely scratched the surface of this game. If you're interested enough in 8-bit Japanese games that you're watching this, then you're already aware that Dragon Quest is one of the cornerstone franchises in Japan. That said, the first Dragon Quest performed well, but not spectacularly. That was enough to get it a sequel, and it's Dragon Quest II where things really took off. There were 2.4 million copies sold on the Famicom, and that made it the 6th best-selling Famicom game of all time. And it's a bit of a match set with the original Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest I laid out how gameplay would work for JRPGs. Dragon Quest II laid out how the genre would work. There's actually a story to Dragon Quest II. The game has a subtitle, Akuryo no Kamigami, which would roughly be the gods of the devils. The story, as you initially set out, is that you're a valiant prince and your father sends you to defeat an evil wizard. But first you have to get help from your cousins. While you're only good at hitting things with a sword, they have magical abilities that will help. You start out alone, and you won't be strong enough to even make it to the first town, so you'll have to just walk around in a circle for a while beating up monsters. You do this until you're strong enough to reach the second castle, and there you encounter another improvement in Dragon Quest II. You no longer have to go back to your home castle to save. Any of the kings will give you a password that you can enter to continue. That's different from the US version where it used a battery backup. At that castle, you get on the trail of your cousin and head over to this dungeon, but he's already moved on. The dungeons are more involved now, too. You no longer have to have a light spell or a torch, but there are individual rooms. And there's people in them that you talk to. Here you find out that your cousin went to your castle, but when you get there, you find out he went on to the next town. And then finally, you get your second party member. Multiple party members and parties of enemies is another big change in Dragon Quest II. Having multiple party members opens up the combat system to allow for a bit more tactics. Your cousin doesn't hit nearly as hard as you do, but he has magic that he can use. You have to be careful about targeting too, because you won't switch which group you're targeting if it dies before you attack. So after doing a little bit of grinding to have enough cash to buy some equipment, the next dungeon gets you a key that will open up silver doors. And that's where I had to stop. You just can't earn money very quickly in Dragon Quest II, and anything past your starting equipment is extremely expensive. We're talking grind for 45 minutes so that you can buy the next level of weapon. Adding party members to Dragon Quest II required another new feature. If they fall in battle, you then have to haul their coffin around behind you. You take that to a priest in one of the towns or castles, and then you can have them revived. Perhaps the most infamous thing about Dragon Quest II in Japan are the passwords. They actually start out small, 2 lines of 10 characters each. But as you progress in the game, they become longer and longer. The passwords max out at 52 characters. This was an enormous problem for players, and in response, Nintendo began developing options to store save game data in RAM that was maintained by a battery. It wasn't the first time this was done, even by Nintendo, but this time it will stick, and extensive passwords like in Dragon Quest II will become the rare exception. As one of the most popular games ever made, Dragon Quest II got re-released a lot. Usually it's packaged with Dragon Quest I since that game is so short. In the end, Dragon Quest II is the best 8-bit RPG yet. It's got a much more expansive world, the gameplay systems are improved and more refined, you've got better monsters, the dungeons are improved, the world's better, there's an actual story. Even after all of that though, it's still just an 8-bit RPG. And that means constant grinding, and an enemy encounter rate that makes going even a short distance a long haul. You've got to have patience to be willing to play this one today. It's still a huge step up from Dragon Quest I though, even if they did lose the background in the combat scenes. Of course, that's removing Dragon Quest II from its historical context. Maybe the most significant thing about the game is that it set the stage for Dragon Quest to become the phenomenon. And that's what we're going to see the next time I reach one of these games. Eggerland might be the most confusing game series that was only dealt with by one publisher. Other series need lots of overlapping companies to make things extra confusing, but HAL did this all on their own. The Eggerland games are a series of puzzle games that all follow the same general rule set, and they'd eventually become known as The Adventures of Lolo, even in Japan. However, every time there was a release on a new platform, HAL would mix up the contents. So the first Eggerland game was on the MSX computer, and some of that, plus a bunch of other stuff, got shoved into a blender and got turned into Eggerland for the Famicom Disk System. When it came time to release the games in the United States on the NES, HAL shoved this and a few other Eggerland games into a blender, and poured out the US The Adventures of Lolo. But then for later cartridge releases in Japan, they also used the title The Adventures of Lolo, along with things like the title screens and cutscenes, but the contents of the game were completely different. The result is a series that people often equate different versions with each other, but they don't really match up. On the disk system, Eggerland is not The Adventures of Lolo, though you will find some screens from Eggerland in The Adventures of Lolo. Now I happen to enjoy these games quite a bit. They're nice little puzzle games. But this first Eggerland game, well, they were definitely still figuring things out. The enemy behavior and movement is as consistent, the puzzle design can be unfair, even the very first one, and some truly baffling design decisions. The plot of the game is that you are Lolo, the little blue puffball, and on the eve of your wedding, your fiancée Lala has been abducted. Obviously, the only way that you could possibly get her back is by navigating a 100-room maze of puzzles, finding the key treasures, and then defeating the villain in a game of rock, paper, scissors. Yeah, that's one of the baffling design decisions I mentioned. The Labyrinth is laid out in a grid of 10 by 10 screens, and your goal on every screen is to collect all of the hearts, which will unlock the chest, then collect the key in the chest, and that permanently clears the room out while opening all of the doors. Once the doors have been opened, you can freely move in and out of that room. So technically, as you complete rooms, you'll find that additional rooms connected to it are available to you. And theoretically, you'd be expanding the maze. Except it doesn't really work out that way. A lot of the rooms are only solvable if you come in from one particular entrance. What this means is that there's usually only a couple of options available to you. Maybe after you're past the first 20 rooms, things will open up more, but I kinda doubt it. Naturally, collecting all of those hearts in the room is not straightforward. There's always something in your way. Sometimes it'll be blocks that you can just push around. But more often it'll be monsters that have particular ways of moving and reacting to you. This Eggerland in particular has a lot of puzzles that have tight timing. That's something that turns up in all of these games, but the majority of the ones I played here required some fast reflexes to complete. At least when you enter a room initially, everything is frozen until you move. That gives you an opportunity to plan. Many of the series' mainstays are here. The worms that just sit in place and block your way. The skulls and dragons that are inactive until you collect the last heart. And then the skulls move and the dragons shoot fire whenever you cross in front of them. The Medusas that will shoot in all directions. And the monsters that will throw knives at you if you cross their path. One difference to them here is that they've got some unspecified range. So if you can stay far enough away, then they won't throw anything at you. And that means that they're used in puzzles where you have to ride that line, and it just makes it more annoying. You've got the little green fellows who will chase after you and when they catch up to you and block that square. Plus the armadillo-type enemies that will roll after you if they spot you. Both of these have some very strange walking patterns that are tough to deal with. In later games, the rules for their movement is much more clearly defined. Sometimes when Lolo picks up a heart, they get the ability to shoot a bubble twice. A bubbled enemy can be pushed around, and if you shove them in the water, you can use them as a bridge. Shooting a bubbled enemy will blow them away, and then they'll reappear in their original position a few seconds later. You only get a few shots like this, and they only come from certain hearts. So if you use them incorrectly, or you pick up the hearts in the wrong order, then the puzzle could become unsolvable. And this happens in the very first room. You have to use 2 shots to clear a path to a heart, and then you have a 50-50 chance for which heart locked behind those worms has the other 2 shots you need. Guess wrong, and you have to hit select to end Lolo's life. You have 5 lives, but when you continue, you start out exactly where you left off, so the lives don't really matter. You can also save your progress exactly where you are, and it doesn't even back you out to the main menu of the game when you do that. When you clear some rooms, a passage will open up to take you to a special bonus level where you have to collect the treasure chest in a time limit, and these rooms contain vital treasures that you have to have in order to complete the game. There's other items that you can collect, like this raft that will carry you on currents in the river. Some of the rivers have currents, some don't, and you don't know where they are or what direction they're going until you shove something into it. These currents are required at times to solve puzzles. So again, you have to trial and error, dying a whole bunch until you get it right. That raft is also one of my big annoyances in the early game. There's a room filled with water that you have to pass through to get to the only entrance where you can solve a particularly nasty puzzle. And if you die while doing that puzzle, then you go back to before the water-filled room. And so you have to very slowly drift through the entire room, a process that takes 40 seconds before you can attempt the actually difficult puzzle again. That is not fun. In Japan, this doesn't seem to be an especially popular Eggerland game. Or at least it doesn't get a whole lot of attention. The few comments I could find that were specifically about this version mentioned that they had fond memories of it, though I did see a few people pointing out that it is unfair. And my take on it is, this is a starting point. If you want to play an Eggerland game or Lolo game, play one of the other ones. You would play one of the 3 Famicom cartridge releases, and have a pretty good time with literally hundreds of puzzles. This one is just kinda sloppy still. It comes across like HAL is still feeling their way out with what they can and can't do with a puzzle game. The later ones are much more refined and a lot more fun. So feel free to give this one a miss unless you're an absolute completionist. There's this phenomenon I've noticed as I've worked my way through these 8-bit libraries. I always want to see what players outside of the US cultural context think about these games. A typical American who just pulls up a random game in an emulator is going to have a very different response than somebody who played it when they were a kid. And I've noticed that Japanese fans tend to be very forgiving of licensed games. A licensed game pops up on the NES, and an American is warding it off by holding up a D-pad. The licensed game pops up on the disk system, and Japanese players are going, well, I'm playing as my favorite character. Okay, some of that might be because I'm mostly finding the people who are still talking about the game 40 years later. Many of the people who hated games like Ultraman, Kaijuu, Teikoku no Gyakushuu grew up, became salarymen, and sold all of their old video game stuff to Hardoff. Ultraman is a classic Japanese television show about an alien cop who comes to Earth to fight monsters. And inevitably, at the climax of every episode, those monsters would become giant-sized, and so would Ultraman. The plot of Ultraman, Kaijuu Teikoku no Gyakushuu, is that Ultraman returned to his home planet, and then all the monsters that he killed over the course of his television show came back to life. So now he's back roaming the galaxy and stopping all of the monsters again. The game's a side-scrolling run and gun, and when you start every stage, you're tiny and running around. A jumps and B shoots, and coming into contact with any enemy will kill you instantly. That's not a life bar at the top of the screen, that is just decoration. Most of the enemies die in one hit, though there are a few that take a bit more punishment. The real challenge is that many of them have patterns that are inconsistent. They might jump different distances or heights, or track you in a different way. They can make a lot of them difficult to deal with consistently. Some enemies, when they're destroyed, will drop a flashing dot. This is just worth points. There's no reason to collect them. There is one power-up that you can collect, and these are invisibly hidden in the game. If you shoot the correct spot, then a medal will appear, and it can, but won't always, change your weapon. You will get rapid fire or the ability to shoot through enemies. What effect, if any, it'll have is determined when you pick it up. It's pretty difficult to get through the stages as you're running and jumping, and any little thing that randomly spawns in could kill you instantly. But you do have one special trick that can help you. When you press the start button, you grow to giant size. As a giant, you have 3 minutes to complete the stage, and rather than reverting to your tiny form, you just die when time runs out. You can extend the timer by 1 minute by collecting a jewel. But those jewels are relatively rare, and there's never more than one per stage. If you transform early, then you can just walk through everything. Giant Ultraman can't be defeated. However, you have to defeat the giant monsters to complete the stage, and these will be one-on-one battles where you basically have to beat them down. When you're giant, pressing up will kick. Don't do that, it's a total waste of time. And the A button will do a chop. The way that all of the monster battles work out is that the monster will rush you, and you basically have to stay far enough away from them that you can hit them without getting hit yourself. If you're hit and flashing, then you can't hurt the enemy. There is a major issue with the giant monster fights. It's very difficult to hit anything. Even if you haven't just taken damage, it's hard to get your hits to register. Weirdly, one of the better strategies here is to turn around and attack in the other direction because you'll hit whatever is right behind you. Don't try to attack monsters from behind because stepping on their tail will hurt you. It is possible to stun them into multiple hits, but usually they break free after just 2 or 3 blows. The giant monsters also tend to have a ton of health, but if you pound on them long enough, they'll explode and go away. Though, don't attack the explosion of the final boss because that makes it explode again while your timer is still running down. You also possess additional abilities in your Ultraman form. Pressing start will rotate through these as indicated by the bar at the top of the screen, and every ability except for the chop can only be used once. When you transform, you always have the shield available to you. It'll freeze an enemy in place, and when the timer dips under a minute, 2 new attacks, a beam and a buzzsaw, are added to the bar. These ranged attacks follow the same rules as your chop though, so don't attack with them while you're flashing. If you do, you've just wasted the shot. There are a few stages that have a different layout. They're essentially shoot-em-ups, although you can freely move back and forth. When you turn into Ultraman on these stages, you'll be flying around and shooting a beam, but otherwise the principles remain exactly the same. There are 12 stages in the game, and if you manage to complete the whole thing, then there's a second game mode where the enemies take more hits, but you're playing as Ultra 7 rather than the original Ultraman. It actually isn't that difficult to do this, since you can save your progress whenever you get a game over, and you can always continue from where you left off. There is an unusual variant of Ultraman Kaijuu Teikoku no Gyakushuu. In this version that I've been playing, you've been hearing snippets of the Ultraman theme and the little fanfare that he has. Turns out, Bandai didn't get the rights to those. And this time the copyright infringement didn't slip under the radar. So Bandai had to reissue this game with all of those music cues stripped out. And of course the damage was already done by the time that happened, so copies without the music, which have an updated label, are actually kind of rare. As I mentioned, people still fondly think back on this game in Japan. It was Ultraman's first console game. I guess I should say, I don't hate this one, but it is pretty awkward. The nearly random enemies and one-hit kills makes running around in your small form rather difficult, and not in a fun way. But then in your giant form, the only challenge is completing the stage before time runs out. It gives the game a weird sense of progression, where you'll essentially have to memorize strategies to get through the first 75% of a stage, and then you just walk through the rest. I also feel like the game is very bare bones. I've pretty much described everything in the game to you, and I'm barely over the 6-minute mark. There's just nothing to this one. Ultraman for the disk system winds up being mediocre, which, now that I think about it, describes most Ultraman games. So I guess they were laying out what Ultraman video games would be. Now here we have an oddity. Until I recorded this video, I have never played this game. I spent an entire $1.22 on it, got into the package with a lot of other things I'd much rather play, and then into its spot in my collection it went, never to emerge. And the reason for that is, it's the black bass. Even if I liked any fishing games other than Sega's, the original black bass has a pretty bad reputation. The game was bad enough that Hotbees skipped it and went straight to the sequel when releasing Black Bass internationally. The game you might be familiar with from the NES is actually the Black Bass 2. But I need to give the game a fair shake. So I popped it in, tried it out, and everything went wrong. I'm just going to cut to the punchline here. In an hour of play, I didn't manage to catch a fish. It was over half an hour before I managed to hook one. And in the end, I only hooked 2 of them. I read the manual, I checked guides, I checked videos of how to play. Nothing helped me penetrate this game. The Black Bass actually started as a computer game, and it was 3 years old before it came to the Famicom. The game is a fishing derby. You set out in the morning on a Japanese lake and try to catch as many fish as possible. Catch enough, and you move on to the next lake. When you start the game, you're asked to input your name, and here you run into the first problem. The interface in Black Bass is terrible. There's no way to take back anything that you've inputted. On the name entry screen, the A button picks the letter, and the B button ends input. After that, the A button rotates through your options, and the B button chooses. And if you screw up, all you can do is reset. When you're ready to set out, you're given the choice of what season you want to fish in, spring, summer, or fall, and then you're out on the lake. The first stage is Ashinoko, a lake I've actually been on, and the graphics don't resemble it at all. Now you drive your boat to the location in the lake that you want to fish at. I've been told that the lower left is the best fishing spot, but I didn't really see any difference when I was trying out different locations. Next you select your lure. The first 3 all float on the surface. Don't pick those because I never saw a single fish near the surface. The other 2 sink, so you'll want to pick one of those 2. Now you go to cast. You press the A button to start it up, and the B button when the power bar reaches the distance you want. Usually, going full power means that the lure will land on the shore, and you could lose it. So you'll probably want to be about 3/4 of the way. The screen then goes to this side view. If you're really lucky, you might see a fish there. Right, up, and A all reel in the line. They also affect the lure behavior. You'll want it to go about halfway down the screen, and hopefully a fish shows up. Make the lure dance a bit to get its attention, and if it bites, then you start pressing A to reel it in. There's no feedback on how the line is doing, and if you hold down A continuously, it'll snap. So I tried pressing A for a little bit, letting go, pressing A for a little bit, letting go. That also made my line snap. There's just no information on how you're doing, and that makes reeling in a fish very difficult. Even Japanese sources that I found mention how difficult it is to land a fish. If there's no fish there, then all you can do is take about 30 seconds to reel in your line all the way again, and at that point you're given the option to cast again, change your bait, or move to another spot. If there's one key problem to the black bass, even more than the terrible interface, it's that fish are rare. I tried just letting my bait sit out there for a while, see if maybe it was a situation where you had to wait, but that didn't seem to have a real effect. The lack of fish really made black bass painful to play. For the first half hour I was casting, I might see a fish that quickly goes off screen when the lure lands, and then I just reeled it in again. I don't even see how people who like fishing games would enjoy this one. and yet it still somehow spawned an enormous series. Maybe it'll be better when we get to Black Bass 2. Something that might be hard to grasp from the far-off year of 2024 is just how much experimentation was happening with video games in the early 1980s. Boundary pushing still exists, of course, but the big companies are really hesitant to try anything outside of what they already know will work. I've shown a lot of odd experiments so far with the Famicom disk system, but Nazoler Land might be the oddest to modern eyes. The closest direct comparison that I could make has been gone for 25 years. Nazoler Land is a video game magazine. Not a magazine about video games. It's a magazine-style release of video games. The concept wasn't that uncommon back in the 1980s. There were various computer publications that had floppy disks or tapes, and they'd have regular releases like this with small programs on them. Nazoler Land is Sunsoft moving that concept to the Famicom disk system and creating a disc with 8 little games on it. The cover even tells you that this is the first issue, thus promising more. However, there'd only be 3 more issues, and they weren't exactly regularly paced. I'll get to those in time. There are no articles in this magazine, even in the manual. It is solely the 8 minigames. And the minigames are... well, they're what you'd expect as a minigame collection put out in early 1987 by Sunsoft. They're still a few years away from really stepping up their games, and the games here are the blandest, most obvious, most boring games that you could imagine. The high point is Kaiten Meiro Doorman. In it, your goal is to find your way to the top of a 5-story maze, and the passages in the maze are blocked by gates. These gates will rotate when you bump into them, and because they're laid out like a T, they can only rotate 90 degrees back and forth, while the paths that you can take change quite a bit. You can't rotate that door into a wall, so you're going to spend a lot of time flipping those doors and then trying to circle around so that you can flip it back in a way that will let you pass. Walking into a number will take you to that floor, and sometimes going up a floor will lead you to a dead end. So you'll have to backtrack and find a different route up. There are no monsters, there's no time limit, there's no way to get a game over. And as I said, this is the best of the games. If you want to exit any of the games in Nazoler Land, then you have to press reset on your console. A soft reboot will take you back to the main menu. Next up is Nazoler Uranai, or Nazoler Fortune Telling. Fortunately, this isn't just giving you a random fortune. Instead, you're playing Mastermind with the signs of the zodiac. Mastermind is a logic puzzle where the player's goal is to figure out the pattern by making their own pattern and being told how many they've got exactly right, the full stars here, and how many are just in the wrong position, the empty stars. It's one of those things that's trivial to do, so everyone used to put it in their games. When you figure out the combination, when you solve it, you get a fortune based on how long it took you to solve the puzzle and how many guesses you had to make. So I guess this is implying that you can change your fate by playing Mastermind well. The next minigame is Super Jigsaw. There is one picture, and it keeps scrambling itself in a 11 by 14 pattern until you hit the start button. Then you can swap the position of any 2 pieces by hitting the A button. Whatever's on the clear arrow will swap with the solid arrow, and you press B to change which arrow you're controlling. Since everything is solid squares, and a lot of it doesn't have a whole lot of context, this seems like a really bad puzzle to solve. And your reward is a really awful picture. The guy with the question mark on his forehead is one of the characters associated with Nazoler Land, but that doesn't make it an interesting design. The fourth game is what might be the most significant one in the package, Momoko Hime o Sukue, or Save Princess Momoko. It's a basic little adventure game where you're given options and then pick from them. Do you go left or do you go right? Do you go up the stairs or do you go down? You're in a dungeon, though you really can't navigate it, and as you walk around you'll find items that might get you past obstacles that you encounter. If you wander into the wrong place, it's an instant game over. There's no saving or loading here, and it's not like you can really plan ahead. The reason this one's significant is that it's actually well, I can't really call it a port. Well, let's call it a version of an existing game. It was a choose-your-own-adventure style game book kind of thing, except it was published in Puzzler magazine. That was a magazine dedicated to this kind of game and logic problems. So while this isn't especially fun, it does give us a window into what was happening elsewhere with Japanese games at the time. The next game you could play is Nihon Isshu Ultra Quiz, or the Ultra Quiz around Japan. The idea here is that you have a certain number of points to start with, 50,000, and then you spend those to travel to new locations in Japan where you'll be asked a trivia question. Get it right and you get some points, get it wrong and you lose some. There are random events that can occur as you go around, but what you're really looking for are 7 magic balls that you would bring back to Tokyo, where you would get your wish granted. One thing I appreciate about this one is that there's no time limit on the questions, so I actually managed to read some and get them right. In most of these quiz games, I'm still working my way through the question when time runs out. I'm not sure how many questions there are in the quiz game, but I suspect it is not a huge quantity. Not when there's this many other games on the disc. The next game, and I am really using that term loosely here, is Famicom Takise Kensa, or Famicom Aptitude Test. Here you wait for the timer to go off, and then mash the A button as hard as you can. Whoever mashes harder wins. You can play this one against the computer or 2 players, but either way it's not a lot of fun. If you hadn't had enough of jigsaws yet, the next game is Oshidashi Puzzle. This one has 3 different stages, and all 3 stages have a different image. The key difference here is that you're controlling a vehicle that can shove entire rows and columns of puzzle pieces. It's a cute variation on the jigsaw puzzle concept, if only it had a better picture. The final game on the disc is 3D Maze. All you get here is a first-person maze that is 32 squares by 32 squares, or 1,024 locations. The maze always starts in the same spot, and there's a goal, and they give you a page of what is essentially graph paper in the manual to plot your course. But there's no landmarks here, and nothing really to do in the maze other than wander. I tried using the good old hand-on-the-wall technique, and I kept walking in loops, so I suspect that they've designed the maze specifically for that. Or maybe the maze is just too simple and everything looks exactly the same. However, there is a map of 3D Maze in Nazoler Land. You just have to beat the quiz game to see it. Hopefully you've got something handy to copy the map down when that happens. If you do manage to solve 3D Maze, then you're given an address to send a postcard to, where you'd be entered into a drawing for a prize. That's everything in this first issue of Nazoler Land. Sunsoft is going to continue their association with Puzzler magazine over the course of these, so we'll see more adaptations of things from the magazine as well as their mascots. Shockingly, Nazoler Land was not well received in Japan. It sold about 100,000 copies. From what I could find of people's memories of this one, it seems like a lot of people bought it on clearance, and then immediately popped it into the disc rewriter kiosk. And yeah, this is a disc of stinkers. I don't think there's anything on here that really rises above half-baked idea. Like, I could see the shoving puzzle game working, but it needs a little bit more going on and maybe better visual design for the image. The rotating door maze would be better if there were enemies chasing you and power-ups. But there's no saving the button masher. I know that if I bought this first issue of Nazoler Land, I definitely would not be picking up the second. Shinjinrui is a super difficult shoot-'em-up with a weird theme that never quite manages to be as good as it should be. partially because of how difficult it is. I'm saying all of that up front because this is a game where the story behind it is way more interesting than the game itself. Let's start with the publisher, Ricksoft. This is the only game to come from Ricksoft, so who are they? Well, they're the short-lived game publishing division of the company Rico Elemex, who these days are best known for making watches. They're pretty diversified though, and in the mid-80s they were also making semiconductors. In particular, they were one of the companies making chips for the Famicom. So it's understandable why they might want to try their hand at video games. Except they're not really doing that. The thing is, Shinjinrui was made by Hudson Soft. But Hudson Soft is already a publisher on the Famicom. So what's happening there? And that gets us into behind-the-scenes politics at Nintendo. And in particular, how Nintendo was forcing changes to the licensing agreements with their third parties. The original licenses to publish games on the Famicom were pretty good deals. Anybody who got on board early could manufacture their own carts, and for arcade manufacturers who already had deals with chip suppliers, that meant they could augment the Famicom's library pretty quickly. Well, now we're in 1987, the Famicom is a giant hit, and Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi has decided he wants more money, even if it means walking all over the partners who helped build their platform. To do this, he decides to implement the same restrictions on Famicom publishing that they placed on publishing for the NES in the US. All cartridges have to be manufactured by Nintendo, and only 5 games a year. Keep in mind, this isn't about preventing a software glut. The software glut's already happened, and the Famicom is still going strong. This is solely about extracting more money from the people making games on the Famicom. That sets off a revolt among the publishers. The new ones and the small ones, they have to take what Nintendo's dishing out. But companies like Namco? They already have their own production line. They can just ignore the requirements and keep making games. Hudson Soft, however, they were reliant on Nintendo's cartridge manufacturing. And so they attempted a two-pronged approach. 1. Setting up a dummy company to publish their games, which brings us back to Ricksoft. And the alternative, make their own console. We'll talk about that one when we get about 6 months down the line in the chronology. And we're still not to the game yet with Shinjinrui, because it's a licensed game. The main character in this game is Riki Choshu, a popular professional wrestler. In promotional material featuring him, he declares that the game is no jobber. His name is retained in the US version of Shinjinrui, which was changed to Adventures of Dino Riki. The game itself has absolutely nothing to do with wrestling, which has made people suspect that it was a game that Hudson was developing and then just stuck Riki in. One of the only things that the game is remembered for is the strange message in the manual supposedly written by Riki Choshu himself. If you want to hear that, wait till the end. The title Shinjinrui can be translated as The New People, though the game spells it out as The New Type. Supposedly, this title came about because all of the programmers were new to the Famicom. Okay, I think 4 minutes in is a good point to start talking about the game. It's a shoot-'em-up where the action has been moved to the ground instead of space. As Riki slowly advances up the screen, monsters appear and he shoots them down. Eventually, he'll reach a cave with a boss in it. There are 4 stages in total in Shinjinrui, and then the game loops after that. If you want to have any chance of making progress, you'll need to collect some power-ups. They're hidden inside different objects on each stage, so you shoot the flowers on the first stage, the pots on the second, and the skulls on the third. Inside those, you'll find icons, and annoyingly, you can't shoot over the icons. so power-ups get in your way just as much as obstacles do. The diamonds are just some points. You'll still want to collect them since the threshold for extra lives is super low in this game. You earn an extra life every 10,000 points. The fist powers up your weapon. You go from small fireballs, to axes, to boomerangs, to a flamethrower. The rate of fire in Shinjinrui is pretty slow. I didn't have to break out a rapid fire controller to overwhelm it. The feet are speed increases, and I found that you only really want one. Get more than that and you'll really start flying everywhere. This actually causes a bit of a problem because when you get hit, it steps your power-ups down one level. Dropping from boomerangs to axes isn't a big deal. But when the speed levels are too slow, just right, too fast, and I can't stop, dropping a level is actually a problem. In some of the tougher pots you'll find meat and hearts. Hearts increase your maximum life bar by 1, and meat restores your life bar. You can also find power-ups in spots where there's nothing. Shoot the right place and you might find a star, and that destroys all enemies on the screen. The strangest feature in Shinjinrui is how you jump. There are some sections of the game where you have to jump to get over some barriers. Falling in is an instant death, too. You don't stop marching up the screen, so the platforms you're jumping between move underneath you, and even once you land, you keep going up. Getting across the water can sometimes require precision movement. And precision movement is something that you don't have in this game. Annoyingly, this is the only thing that jumping is good for. You can't dodge enemies or bullets with it. You still get hit by them. The result is jumping is annoying instead of being a fun addition. When you do get a game over, it is possible to continue. You have to hold down up and then press start when you're on the game over screen. Then you'll pick up right where you left off, though being without power-ups in some spots can make it almost impossible to continue. And that's Shinjinrui, a strange one-off experiment that's more interesting for what's happening around it than the game itself. The game itself is okay. It feels like second-tier Hudson, so you can understand why they passed it off to someone else. Maybe with a little bit more refinement it could have worked, but there's just too many little problems. Like the way that the enemies spawn in. You get these enormous waves of them that drop in on you. Sometimes they fire off a huge barrage of attacks that have no opening. If you're standing in the wrong spot and your shots are getting blocked by a pickup, you'll quickly get run into a corner. And the way that the movement works is just awful. I feel like if jumping was a dodge, that might fix most of the game's problems. As it stands, this is an almost completely forgotten game that mainly acts as a signpost for the changes in the Japanese gaming industry at the time. Hi everybody. Are you playing well every day? Are you studying hard? You can't just be a hero by playing and studying. Let me tell you a little bit about how Riki can make the game better for you. First, the Famicom game is also physically fit. Kiddies can't just play games. Go outside and play some soccer to get stronger. It will make you light on your feet in the game, too. Second, the Famicom game is focused. Playing sloppily for hours just doesn't work. If you play for 1 hour a day, concentrate on it for 1 hour. Nobody without concentration can beat Riki. You can do it. Finally, the Famicom game is also smart. Use your head and come up with different strategies and options. Don't rely on other people. Think for yourself. Doing this, even the first time you play, you'll be able to get a high score. Take my advice and become a hero. Hiryu no Ken has a real bad case of wrong place, wrong time. And by wrong time, I mean the year 2021. In the context of early 1987, it's clever and innovative. It takes some concepts that we've seen and expands them further than they've ever gone before. But it's also clunky and stiff. I respect the effort, I think it's important historically, but I never want to play it again. Hiryu no Ken, or Flying Dragon as it's known in the US, is our first Famicom game from Culture Brain. As far as I can tell, the Nihon Brain Micro Academy in the credits is just a group from Culture Brain. They're kind of a strange publisher, not many games released for the Famicom, and 80% of them are from 2 series. I know a story from somebody I know who popped into their offices in the 90s, and they came to the conclusion that Culture Brain was a Yakuza front company. I've got no way to confirm that, but the Yakuza do have legitimate businesses. Given it's the Famicom boom, it kind of makes sense for them to have their own game company. Hiryu no Ken actually started out as an arcade game, but it was changed dramatically when it came to a home console. The arcade game was just a series of one-on-one fights between the main player and a series of opponents, similar to Yayar Kung Fu. For the Famicom, they added these platforming sections. There's a story in the game about rival martial arts schools, and you're trying to recollect some scrolls that have secret techniques on them. But really your goal is to go on a journey to become stronger and eventually become the world champion. Your journey to the world championship starts out in this side-scrolling stage. On these stages, your goal is to defeat 5 of the monsters released by the evil organization, and then get to the goal. The thing is, monsters appear based on time rather than position in the stage. So it's very likely that you'll reach the goal and not be able to enter it. But the stage loops forever, so you just have to keep going. There's only a handful of monster designs, including for some reason this little girl. When you defeat one of the monsters, they drop a little power symbol, and that fills in one of your bars up top. The fist increases your attack power, the foot increases your jump height and running speed, the wave lets you shoot a beam when you hit punch, the second wave lets you shoot multiple waves, and finally you get the key to the exit. These statues you find on the side-scrolling levels also have items inside them. The medicine restores a bit of your life, and that one reoccurs if you loop through the stage again. This bag just has some points in it. I think the 1-up is self-explanatory. This icon increases your power in the one-on-one fights. And this strange item gives you a barrier in front of you. It knocks out enemies for a short time, but if you get hit, say by having someone drop on you, then you lose it. On these stages, the B button punches, the A button kicks, and you have to jump by pressing up. You can jump down through platforms by pressing down while you're in the air, but you have to be careful that you don't just fall through everything. Another thing to watch out for on these stages is that sometimes the monsters will jump off into holes, and then you don't get the power scroll. That means you have to go through one more monster in the loop. Every side-scrolling stage only has 4 types of monsters, so you always have to kill the first one twice, even if you do the whole thing perfectly. My other big tip on these stages is to use that wave attack and use it often. So we've completed the side-scrolling stage, it's on to a tournament. And the first one you get to has a tutorial in front of it to teach you how the fighting system works. It's a pretty lengthy one too. A tutorial like this is something we haven't seen before in Famicom games. Basically, if the circle appears on you, there's an incoming attack, and you press the pad in that direction to block it. If the circle's on the opponent, they have an opening and you can hit them. And then you push in that direction and either punch or kick. There's some special moves that are triggered by pressing A and B at the same time also. Pressing down and doing that will trigger a sweeping leg kick. and if you're in a neutral stance, it'll do a spinning kick. Every time you connect with someone, the KO bar at the top of the screen fills up a little bit more, and every time they hit you, it gets drained away. When it's full, you'll hear an alert sound, and that means you can activate your strongest moves. By pressing up A and B at the same time, you do the Hiryu no Ken. It's also just about useless, because it's really easy to dodge. There's another special move that activates with the KO bar. It's only usable against the bosses of the arena fights. In those cases, doing a high punch makes you jump back and shoot a beam at them. There's one more special move worth talking about. If you block a high punch and then immediately press down and B, you do a judo throw. The timing on it's actually a little bit annoying, but it does a lot of damage and the crowd goes wild. There's a pretty good variety of opponents in these matches, and they all have tricks to them that you have to learn. This woman can throw you if you hit her with a high punch, and this guy grapples you when there's no targets showing. You can break free by pressing left and right. In the first two matches of a tournament, your health bar refills after the fight. When you win the semi-final, though, the boss jumps in immediately after you defeat that opponent, giving you no time to recharge. You can replenish yourself during a match by catching these drinks that fly out from time to time. The hitbox on them is a little bit spotty, though. They go into your inventory and you hit select to use one. One thing to be aware of in these matches is that the dots are a guideline, not a requirement. You can dodge a high attack by ducking down, or you might choose to go for a different blow that gets more damage. The dots are useful, but you don't have to use them. When fighting the bosses, the regular attacks don't do a whole lot of damage, so you'll have to use special moves on them. The throws, sweep kicks, and your beam attack are what's really going to make the difference there. I have one more compliment to give about Hiryu no Ken. It's got a really cinematic presentation to the game. There's some fun cutscenes with dramatic music in between matches, and there's a real feeling of story progression. Alright, now the bad stuff. The controls are really stiff and unresponsive in this game. If you're expecting fighting game style reactions, you're not going to find them here. It also really bothered me that it's tough to build up to the Hiryu no Ken, and when you use it, your opponent almost always just gets out of the way. Hiryu no Ken was an enormous franchise in Japan. By my count, there's 15 games in the series, and I think 4 of those were released in the US. We're going to see 3 more Famicom games in the series before we're done. I can get why Hiryu no Ken was a big hit. We haven't seen anything like this on the Famicom yet, and even if it doesn't play quite right from the hindsight we have over 30 years later, it's a pretty creative game. But that gameplay is so unrefined, I can't really go back to it. Somebody has to make those first few steps on the road, and that's Hiryu no Ken. But I think I'll just skip ahead to the destination. I find Esper Dream to be a fascinating game. It came out at a moment when Konami was deep into an action-adventure phase. And honestly, they were doing pretty good for themselves with it. Esper Dream landed square in the middle of things like Vampire Killer, Tori, Goonies II, and The Maze of Gallius. But they hadn't pivoted to be solely an action-adventure game company. They released about 60 games in 1987 across all divisions, and they weren't sticking to one genre. But I would say maybe a third of those games were action-adventure, or at least feeling out how much more adventure they could put in their action games. Esper Dreams pushes a bit harder on the role-playing game side. You get experience, you level up, you have to do a lot of grinding, but it still has plenty of action for you. The plot of the game is that in Renga Village, The chief's daughter has been kidnapped. The kidnappers are demanding that they surrender the entire village, but the chief finds out that somewhere, out there, there's someone very good at this kind of thing, and so he sends his other daughter into another world to fetch them. Obviously, that's you because you're so good at video games. You start out in front of the chief's house, and once you've accepted his quest, you find out that there are 5 gray houses in Renga village. Each of these leads to a different world, and you'll have to fight your way through them to defeat the gang member at the end. Once all of them have been defeated, then the path to the final boss opens, and you can save the chief's daughter. Technically, it is possible to enter any of the 5 worlds that you like, and start working your way through them. This is a pretty bad idea. There is an intended progression here, and you won't be able to make progress in some worlds unless you've leveled up a bit or acquired the correct items. Though there is nothing to protect you from spikes, you'll just have to walk on those. The worlds can be pretty large and deep, with villages of their own and multiple zones you have to wander through. But the only place that you can save is at the house of the Renga village chief. If you die anywhere in the game, then you lose half your money, lose all of your experience you've gained since your previous level up, and reappear at the chief's house. There's basically 2 modes of play. One where you're walking around and exploring, and one where you're in combat. There isn't much to exploring. In town you can bump into people to talk to them, and you can enter houses to get information, go into shops and buy things. And every place has an inn that you can stay at to recover your health and energy. In the worlds, you'll have little paw prints walking around. Those indicate places where there's a monster. Some of them are in fixed locations to block your path on an important route, while others just spawn in at the edge of the screen. That does mean that if you're walking at the edge of the screen, they can spawn in right on top of you. You can hit the start button to see your status, but there really isn't anything you can do there. Hitting select will rotate through your Esper abilities, but you don't start out with any. You either have to earn them by leveling up, or in a few cases, purchase them from shops. If you have an Esper ability that can be used while exploring, then you activate it by pressing the B button. Esper abilities cost energy points, though. When you've bumped into one of those paw prints, combat begins, and here you shoot your gun by mashing the A button. You can wander freely around the arena, and most enemies, especially early on, can take a real pounding from you. When they die, they might leave behind a purse, which is money, an H capsule, which is health, or an E capsule, which is energy. You can destroy the items that enemies drop, so you'll want to control your shots. When you reach level 3, you get your first Esper ability, and that's a beam attack that you use by pressing B. You're able to destroy one section of the wall of the arena that you're in, and doing that opens a path so that you can run away. In the hour that I had for recording, I mainly wound up exploring the classroom world. Here you could use passages to get on top of tables, and then walk into computers. That's where you can find the quest items that you're required to recover, as well as this item that powers up your Esper abilities. You lose that one if you die, though. I managed to clear out the first area, and then made some progress toward the next town, but because I was just about running out of time, I poked my head into some of the other areas. And that's the big thing about Esper Dream. It is very grindy. The items that you require for getting access to new areas or powering up your abilities cost thousands of gold. You get maybe 25 if you get lucky in combat. And there are multiple things to buy. If you spent your money on something that sounded really good but didn't help you out right that instant, well, then you're probably going to have to do a lot more grinding. And while the combat's fun individually, you are going to be fighting a lot of the same battles over and over and over again. Even the best combat system in the world is going to wear a bit thin after that. Esper Dream is pretty well remembered in Japan. It's picked up a reputation as a hidden masterpiece. Or at least that's what Nintendo called it when they put it on the Virtual Console. It seems like Esper Dream didn't do especially well at the time, but Konami was fond enough of it that they made a sequel 5 years later. That's a bit of a gap there. My feeling is, yeah, this is decent enough. I'm not really sure I'd want to keep playing though, unless I did something like patch the game to give me a ton more experience and cash. The grind here is real and it's brutal, but the rest of Esper Dream is really nice looking and enjoyable. Fortunately, we live in a time where people can do that. Esper Dream has its rough edges, but now it's possible to smooth them out. Golf Japan Course is the most significant Famicom Disk System game that you might not think of as significant. Golf Japan Course is a sequel to one of the most popular games on the Famicom. It is technically the start of a major franchise. It has a first-of-its-kind event attached to it. It's a good demonstration of a shift in Nintendo policies that have major ramifications for the next 20 years. And it's directly tied to some of the most well-known collectibles in Japanese retro gaming. That is a lot for a game that is, well, golf. Golf Japan Course is the first Famicom Disk System game to be released on a blue disc. Only a handful of Nintendo first-party titles got the blue disc treatment, and this variant added a door that would slide open, something to protect the magnetic media. You might recall that the developer of the original Famicom Golf was HAL Laboratory. However, Golf Japan Course was internally developed by Nintendo themselves. At this point, Nintendo was strongly pulling away from all of the developers that helped them in the early days of the Famicom, and completely turning inward. And in the process of doing this, Nintendo wasn't really maintaining their relationships with anyone. HAL didn't know that there was going to be a sequel to their game until it was released. But at this point, HAL had already taken their experience in developing golf games and started making them on computers, though they didn't want to compete with their own game for Nintendo. After this, however, HAL becomes the golf game developer. That includes publishing some golf games on the Famicom, just through other publishers. Nintendo spends the next 5 years burning all of their bridges like this, and essentially reshaping the entire video game industry by people who got burned. Now, if you've ever heard of Golf Japan Course, it's probably because of the contest. If you got what you felt was a really low score, then you could save it to the disc, which would also save your name, phone number, and address, then take it to one of the disc rewriter kiosks. Normally, these would be used to purchase new games and overwrite the contents of a floppy, but certain ones would be hooked up to a fax machine, and it would read the data off of your floppy and send it to Nintendo. If you were one of the low scores, then you could win a prize. The way the contest worked is that you played 4 rounds of golf, and your best 4 scores were totaled. The winner wound up shooting 80 under par for the entire contest. You had until April to send in your scores, so don't try to do it now, it's way too late. The key prize here was a golden floppy, and there's roughly 5,000 copies of this version of the game out there. People who did especially well might have also gotten a disc case shaped like Disc-kun, the Famicom Disk System mascot. Nintendo's going to take this contest and repeat it in a few months, but I'll get to that in a few episodes. While there had been competitions with console games in the past, they inevitably involved taking photographs of your screen and then sending those in. This was automated. You didn't have to do anything more than buy the game, and then go back to the shop to send your scores in. The response to the contest was so strong that Nintendo had to extend the deadline by 2 weeks. The fax line kept getting jammed up by all those incoming calls. When you start playing Golf Japan Course, you'll notice one big difference from the original Golf immediately. The player's no longer some generic golfer, it's Mario. And if you play 2 players, you have Luigi there as well. That makes Golf Japan Course the first time that Mario has been playable in a sports game. And this is considered to be the first in the still ongoing Mario Golf series. The control scheme's a little bit confusing here. While the A button will do the backswing and then connect with the ball action that you might already be familiar with, hitting select will step away from the ball so that you can perform practice swings. Hitting start will give you a view of the green, as well as the current scorecard. And if you want to change your club, then you have to hold down the B button and press up and down. Holding down B and pressing left and right will change how quickly you swing, and that has an effect on how far the ball goes, but the maximum swing speed is really fast. You'll also notice that the lie of the ball now matters, and this is presented visually on screen. The way that the ball appears at Mario's feet will tell you how the ball is obstructed, if it is at all. You have a much smoother selection of directions to aim the ball in, and as you rotate your shot, it will redraw the screen so that you have a new view of the course. Another major change is that the effect of the wind and slopes on the ball's behavior is a lot more extreme. If you're shooting into a headwind, then the ball will turn around so much it will practically go backwards. Mario seems to be playing golf in a hurricane. The greens are almost as bad. The effect of the slopes is pretty extreme. And making things worse is if you attempt to tap the ball in, you're probably going to jump over the hole. This extreme variation in motion carries over to your regular golf swing, not putting, of course. If you hit a little too early or a little too late, it has an enormous outcome on where the ball goes. If you want the ball to fly straight, then you have to hit it perfectly. And of course there can't be any wind, but the important thing is you have to hit it perfectly. And the course itself is, look, it's not a very good golf course. I mean, there's a par 3 with 130 yards, and a par 5 that is over 650 yards. Those are not normal holes. The layout of the course is similarly weird. This is very much a golf video game rather than a golf simulator. And I think that might be why Golf Japan course doesn't have a great reputation in Japan. This is much more difficult to play than other 8-bit golf games. It's obviously a more technically advanced game than the original Golf, but over the next year, everyone else is going to release a golf game, and those are going to wind up being much better received. Though, this did sell very well at the time. A little bit more than 700,000 copies. And of those, 80,000 people entered the competition. My feeling is, it's better than the original Golf, but not as good as what's coming up very soon, and that makes it kind of hard to go back to this one. It's an evolutionary step for the genre, but one that's short-lived as the genre quickly moves on. It's that time again. We're going to break out the family trainer. Or at least my flaky prototype home-built one that barely functions as it is and kind of fell apart while I was making this video. Yeah, I haven't had time to improve it yet. Maybe 2 years from now when I finally finish this video series. Aerobics Studio, or Dance Aerobics in the US, was an attempt to cash in on the aerobics craze and make an exercise video game. And honestly, this is the first family trainer title that's okay. I'm not saying anybody needs to go out and play this one, but Athletic World and Running Stadium weren't really effective as games, while this is almost a rhythm game. If it had a few varied tunes, and of course if the music was good, then this would actually be something that might get a recommendation from me. There's essentially 3 different modes. You can go through a series of short routines with an aerobics instructor and try to match her footwork as she calls out the time. Screw up too much and you lose a point. You start with 10 points and those drip away. There's multiple levels of these routines too, and you can pick up where you left off in this one. Alternatively, you could pick out a set amount of time to do a routine. Then the aerobics instructor just rotates through a randomly selected set of exercises. You have a score, but if it reaches 0, it doesn't matter. You can always get points back by doing well in a routine. The final mode isn't really a game. It's just a synthesizer where you can step on the pad to make sound. It's cute, but I don't think anybody's going to go out of their way for it. And at the 2-minute mark, I'm already done describing the game. The timing's actually pretty loose with the exercises, so it's not something that becomes frustrating. And in case you can't tell, there's a lot of digitized speech in this one. The aerobics instructor may not have a lot of frames of animation, but I think it does a good job in conveying what people are supposed to do. It even has you stretch before the routine, so you don't hurt yourself. I can't be 100% certain, but I believe Dance Aerobi is the first exercise game. I wouldn't count the previous 2 Family Trainer games, because those are mimicking events, while this one just wants you to get up and exercise. Exercise games are never popular among collectors. I'll let you draw your own conclusions why. But I think Aerobi Studio does a decent job of it. It might be a little too simple, but I don't think that's a bad thing. There's one more special thing about this game. The fact that it has a display of the pad and what you're stepping on makes it useful for diagnosing issues with your family trainer. So if nothing else, Aerobi Studio is a good diagnostic cart. A game from Tosei and Bandai? There's some red flags. The thing is, Pocket Saurus actually demonstrates Tosei getting better. They're not good, and their art design is painful. But Pocket Saurus is a playable game? Really, it's a third-tier platformer that nobody's gonna get super excited about. But if it was one of your 3 Famicom games, you'd probably be able to get some fun out of it. This game starts with a toy line. Pocket Saurus's was a line of miniature dinosaur figurines that transformed into stationary products. Bandai started making them in 1985, so there's some corporate synergy going on here. The game stars Shinji Hashimoto. He was a marketing guy who was the public face of Bandai at the time. Hashimoto moved over to Square in the early 90s, and he's worked on a lot of their stuff as a producer. It seems like most of his game input was in the marketing side. In the game, Hashimoto's been turned into a dinosaur by one of the evil Pocket Sauruses, so he hops into his time machine for some reason. It's not really well justified. Anyway, he has to travel through 10 stages to collect swords that can be used to defeat the final boss. The game has a subtitle, Ouken no Nazo, which could be literally translated as Mystery of the 10 King's Swords. So that's what you're collecting. On the title screen, you're given the option of I'm Tough mode or Papa mode. The manual tells me Papa mode is easier, though I didn't notice any difference between the two. As you move and jump through the levels, you can knock out enemies with these boomerangs. Some of the enemies you defeat will leave behind these capsules, which you'll also sometimes see just sitting around. Touching them makes them pop up and reveal their contents, and then you'll have to collect them again. Honestly, it's kind of redundant. This thing is a flash bomb. You can carry up to 3 of them, and they show up in the upper left-hand corner. To use one, you have to press down and B. And that hits all of the enemies on the screen. The shield turns you into Super Zaurus. It gives you the appearance of an armored suit, lets you throw more boomerangs which move more quickly, and that's it. Even though it's armor, it doesn't reduce damage or anything like that. It also goes away if you take too much damage. The 2x doubles your score for a short while. The question mark gives you a hint. Those aren't worth picking up since they mainly relate to a contest that ended over 30 years ago. H will refill your life bar. C gives you a continue. Those are surprisingly common. You might think that the diamond is just points, but they're actually used in-game at just a handful of places. One of those is when you see a 1-up pickup. They cost 5 diamonds. And to get across this water here, you have to pay 2 diamonds. Even though there's not many capsules before this point in the stage, and if you don't have them, then you're out of luck. You have to just jump across and take the damage. All of the pits that have liquid at the bottom, whether it's water or lava, you can jump into and bounce off of. A weird thing about this game is just how much text there is. Sometimes you'll stop and comment on the action, sometimes enemies will talk to you, and sometimes the game will just stop to quiz the player about what's going on. Get the answer right for a certain number of points. Points actually matter in this game because every 30,000 points you get a life refill. The stages have these sections where suddenly you stop platforming and jump into your time machine to act as a shoot 'em up. On those you can shoot forward and bomb, and the bomb winds up being pretty useful because it's the only thing that can stop this dinosaur that's blocking your path. I also noticed that you can make the screen scroll faster by pressing to the right when you're flying along in your time machine. At some points in the stages, lightning bolts will start dropping out of the sky. If you get hit by one of these, you get into a confrontation with the final boss. Defeat it and you get a code, and that code is entered at the end of the stage to give you a hint in that long-expired contest. There's a set of crossword puzzles in the manual, and the hints here are used to fill that out. I remembered hating Pocket Zaurus. I mean, it's a Tosei Bandai game. Of course I looked at it and went, ooh. Coming back to it now, I'm a bit more sympathetic. There's actually a lot of work put into the game systems on this one, and it controls just fine. The big problems are that the visual design is awful, and that the levels aren't well conceived. The way that some levels depend on you getting the right random pickups is a real headache. And the platforming is a bit muddled, especially with the visuals. There's also some obstacles that just don't have any reasonable way to avoid them. You'll either get lucky and dodge this foot, or it'll come down again, because the pattern's randomized. One of the craziest things in the game is when you do get a game over, it offers you the chance to challenge the final boss. You can't defeat it unless you've collected all the swords, but I thought it was kind of neat that they let players see what they're up against. Pocket Zaurus is a good step up for Bandai and Tosei. You can see that they're improving. But even in 1987, there were better options. It's a good example of a game that's just too bland to be remembered. Kineco II is identical to the original Kineco. We saw that a few episodes ago, and I was going to make this a fairly quick video. Except, there is one extra special thing about Kineco II. Kineco II is the first disc rewriter kiosk exclusive game. As a quick refresh, the kiosks were one of the big selling points of the Famicom disk system. Your game discs weren't permanent. You could take them into a store, pop it into an automated machine, and for a much smaller fee, get a whole new game written to it. It was a video game vending machine. So far, all of the Famicom disk system games that I've shown, you'd be able to go into a shop, pick them up off a shelf, pay for it at the counter, and you were done. But for Kineco II, you already had to have a disc. Of course, Kineco II also cost a lot less than other games. It was only 500 yen to have your floppy disk rewritten, though there was a small additional fee if you wanted the manual. We'll be seeing more of these rewriter kiosk exclusives as we get deeper into the disk system's library, particularly toward the end when it was almost all rewriter. The Kineco games are based on a computer game, which was released for the MSX. The concept is that you're solving a jigsaw puzzle, but the picture is animated instead of static. Kineco II has 10 new pictures in it, and the challenge of the puzzle is that many of the pieces look very similar. At least, very similar when there's no action happening there. You'll have a bunch of chunks of sky, for example. But then some action will occur in the frame, and give you an idea of how the piece should be orientated, and what it connects to. Now this came up with the first Kineco game, but it needs to be restated. Having as many as 48 animated pictures on screen, with the graphics often misaligned, and the animation sometimes playing backwards or upside down, and maintaining that animation as you move a tile around the screen, is completely bananas for the Famicom. The Famicom has a fairly limited number of sprites it can draw, and what can be done to animate the background is even more restricted. So they were doing some weird black magic to make this work on the Famicom. And apparently it was weird black magic that wasn't compatible with the later AV Famicom hardware revision. Since I'm playing on genuine hardware, it scrambles the graphics a bit. For the 10 puzzles, when you start the game, you play them as 16-piece puzzles. After you clear a puzzle that way, then you could play it as a 24 or 48-piece puzzle. If you manage to clear all of the puzzles in their 48-piece configuration, there actually is a short ending congratulations screen. The way the interface works is that the A button is used to select and manipulate pieces, while pressing and holding the B button will let you slide the piece bin at the bottom left and right. To flip a piece, you first have to activate the flip buttons on the left-hand side, and then click on the piece. And you can flip the orientation of an entire row or column by selecting the edge of the puzzle. For puzzles where there's no real indication what orientation you should be using, the game doesn't really care. But for other puzzles, keep an eye out for text, and remember that things fall down. If you just can't get enough of moving puzzle action, there is one more game in the Kineco series. Sega themselves ported Kinetic Connection, which is what Kineco is short for, and they brought it to the Game Gear with a series of Sega-themed puzzles. I mentioned in the first Kineco video that I kinda like the game. It's a fun spin on the jigsaw puzzle, with some surprisingly crafty images that you're trying to solve. It might not be the most pulse-pounding game we'll see in the Famicom Disk System library, but it is an enjoyable one. Sometimes with these videos, things line up pretty nicely. Märchen Veil is a game that carried a bit of weight in Japan, and as I'm recording this, it has just been released in the US for the first time. It's part of the Egg service that's bringing some Japanese computer games to the Nintendo Switch. Märchen Veil was originally released for the PC-88 in 1985. It was developed by System Sacom, a relatively small computer game company who we're going to see a few more times before the disk system is done. It's an action-adventure game with a focus on the storytelling. Basically, the half-step between hide-glide and ease. And here's the disk system port. Coming 2 years after the original's release, it feels very much like a direct port of that PC-88 game, including the limitations of the PC-88. The plot of the game is that you're a prince who has been transformed by an evil witch into a veil. And a veil is basically a satyr. Also, as a veil, his name is Veil. Don't think about it. You'll have to travel through 8 chapters of a mythological kingdom to find how to become human again, and win the hand of your princess. The Märchen of the title is the German word for fairy tale, so that should give you some idea of the tone that they're going for with this one. The way that you play is that you walk around these rather small environments, maybe 3 screens across by 3 high, and pressing the A button throws out an attack. B will make you jump, but only if you have 5 or more hearts of health. You start out with a maximum of 5 hearts, but as you defeat enemies they can drop fairies, and if you collect 4 fairies, then your life bar extends by 1. Extension doesn't mean health recovery though. To do that, you'll have to shoot open obstacles in order to find herbs, hearts, potions, and other things that look tasty. Those items are always in the same places, so it helps to take your time in the early stages, build up your health bar, and then recover your life. There's 2 terrain features that are common on every stage that you should be aware of. The first is a hole that if you fall down it, you go back 1 stage. However, if you fall down it on the first stage, then you just get a game over. The second is this blue circle, and when you're standing on it, if you press up and A on the second player controller, then you save your game. And that is the only way to save your game. That's important because death comes at you fast in Märchen Veil. Falling off the stage, whether you get knocked off or just walk, means an instant game over. And there are gaps in the terrain everywhere. On the other hand, there are places where you can walk down off the stage, like here in Stage 1, and that's where a lot of the difficulty in Märchen Veil comes from. This is one of those games where what you have to do to progress is really obscure. You'll often have to find items in order to unlock progress, but the game doesn't tell you what those items are, even in the big cutscenes, or how to use them. On the first stage, you have to go off the screen there, and then wander around in the sky for a bit until you can pick up this cape. Then you can take it back to another place in the stage, and now you'll survive walking off the edge there and be able to reach this background graphic. If someone didn't tell you that you needed to do that, you're going to have a really hard time figuring it out for yourself. You can see all of the items that you've collected by pressing the select button, but you don't really do anything with them there. And also, there is an extremely long load time when you hit select to exit out of this screen. A few of the treasures that you find will be permanent power-ups. Swords that increase the number of projectiles you can fire, or boots that prevent you from getting hindered by terrain. But for the most part, they're just acting as keys to let you get through to the next chapter. Something that you might have noticed while I've been playing is that Märchen Veil is extremely choppy. You can basically only move in tile steps, and the animation in your movement is extremely restricted. This is something that's reflecting its legacy as a computer game. The PC-88 didn't have any inherent ability for the smooth movement of sprites or scrolling the screen, and so movement there is always choppy. When System Succumb ported it to the Famicom disk system, they didn't really take advantage of the system's capabilities, and that makes movement in Märchen Veil feel really off. There's one other thing I have to mention about this game, and that's the ending. I'm not going to spoil it, but the game ends on a cliffhanger. Our hero reaches the end of his quest, only to find out that things were much worse than he knew. There is a sequel that concludes the story, but it was only published for the PC-98. So if you want to know how everything turns out, then you'll have to break out your old Japanese computer. In Japan, the game is pretty notorious for being excessively difficult, and of course, never delivering on its ending for people who didn't have the computer game. If you didn't have the instruction manual, then you'd never know how to save, and that would take an already extremely difficult game to completely impossible. But that said, it also seems to have a bit of a reputation as a hidden gem. My feeling is it's just a bit too rough to play. You are going to want to follow a guide if you're going to make any progress here, and I think the action winds up feeling a bit too clunky. On the other hand, the cutscenes are actually kind of charming here, and I think the ending cliffhanger is genuinely surprising. At least surprising enough that I kind of want to just watch a playthrough of Märchen Veil 2, so I can know how it all turns out. This is the kind of game where I can see how players would bounce off it pretty hard right now, but in 1987, I could also see players getting kind of hooked on it. So I think Märchen Veil is a bit of a mess of a game, but an interesting mess. This episode's a little bit special. Not for being an anniversary or a particular milestone. The thing is, when I set off on this path, I knew I needed 2 things. Opening and closing music, and a test I could safely discard. For the music, I wanted something generated by the Famicom, but I also didn't want it to be something that could generate copyright strikes. The easy solution there was to compose it myself, and since I didn't have the keyboard for Konami's Disk System music title, Ikinari Musician was it. And since I was going to be fiddling with it and figuring it out anyways, why not record the video and see what happens? So here I am, 6 months later, back at the beginning. And there's one thing that the process taught me. Ikinari Musician is an absolutely awful way to generate music on the Famicom. When you start it up, you're presented with this interface which is incredibly confusing. We'll start with the first thing you need to do, get a backing track. To do that, move the hand cursor until it's on this arrow and hit A. On the world map, you go onto one of these dots and hit A to start up its song. It's about a 5 to 10 second loop that will repeat. Selecting Japan brings up a bigger map that has several musical options. There's also a secret option if you press down from Mexico. It takes you out to the middle of the ocean for some relaxing wave sound. The one that's weirdest to me is how Scotland plays Scotland the Brave. The backing track I use for my opening is rock, and for the ending it's canon. Once you've got a bit of music you want to use playing, hit select to go back to the keyboard and mixer. You go between the mixer controls and the keyboard controls by hitting select as well. On here, the 5 blocks at the top show you different Famicom sound channels. The first one is reserved for the notes that you play, and the other 4 are used for the backing track. You can turn them on and off individually. Below that is this spot where you can choose what synthesized instrument you'll have. The 1 and 2 are for when you're playing a duet. You can assign the instrument separately. On the final row, you have controls for modulating the sound, though I can't tell the difference. From left to right, there are choking, vibrato, tremolo, portamento, and then auto phrases. The mic starts the recording process, and then the tape recorder plays back whatever you've recorded. Using the keyboard is not simple. Pressing left and right jumps a huge amount on the keyboard. Pressing up and down moves 1 note. Not all notes are available for all instruments either. Pressing A plays the selected note, and pressing B trills around the note. The thing is, there's a little bit of a delay when you change notes, and it makes actually playing a song effectively impossible. The best you can do is noodle around, stepping up and down the keys. One more thing about the keyboard, it extends off the right-hand side. If you go to the far right, it jumps back an octave to let you play some more notes. The duet mode lets you play with another person, and versus computer just makes the computer play a duet with you. The thing is, only one person can play notes at a time, so you can just step all over whoever's playing with you. The final option from the main menu is piano mode, and all that does is not let you choose a backing track. One thing they did put in Ikinari Musician are some weird graphics and visualizations. If you press the circle in the upper right hand corner, it makes bubbles appear when you press a key. And on the title screen, if you press AABB right left select, the word boy appears, and then you can press right and left to choose different color schemes. You've got boy, girl, old, and black and white television. Ikinari in the title means spontaneous, or surprise, or suddenly. It's meant to imply that whoever picks up this software will suddenly become a musician. This one's infamous for infuriating people who bought it hoping to get something where they could write out music, or at least play notes cleanly, and as a result of not being able to do anything really with the software, it's become known as surprise, not a musician. There are certain game series that I like to collect. Generally, not the ones that you're thinking of. There are certain games who were hugely influential in the early days of video games, and hung on and had far more sequels and spin-offs than you might expect. One of the biggest of these is Lode Runner, which somehow manages to have about 30 unique games in the series. That is a lot of Lode Runner. And the rights to make Lode Runner console games have bounced around a lot. Originally, they were with Hudson Soft, and they released Lode Runner for the Famicom. This was a monster hit for Hudson. However, almost simultaneously as they were releasing that version, Irem was making Lode Runner into an arcade game. And Irem actually made multiple arcade games, basically using the same engine, just changing out the levels. Well, Hudson's license for the console game must have been super short, because not even 3 years after the release of Hudson's first Lode Runner game, Irem was releasing Super Lode Runner, loosely based on their 4 arcade games, to the Famicom Disk System. This means that the stages in Super Lode Runner aren't really the stages from the original Lode Runner. In the ones that I could play, I saw a few that were close, but for the most part the stages are Irem Originals. Irem Originals that were intended for arcade play. In other words, unfair stages that were designed to drain quarters from pockets. And that means the game scales up in its difficulty fast. I was stuck on level 6 for over half an hour, and not because it was an especially difficult puzzle to solve. Super Lode Runner plays like most Lode Runner games. Your goal is to collect all of the gold on the stage, and then escape off the top of the screen once you've done that. You're running through a maze of platforms, and you can fall from these but not jump. You'll have to use the ladders to climb up. You can also drill holes into the bricks by pressing the B button to drill to the left, or the A button to drill to your right. But you always drill down, so it's the bricks directly left and right of the brick that you're standing on that gets drilled out. You use this ability to make paths to get gold that you couldn't reach, and the holes will fill in after a few seconds. You're also being chased by, I guess they're monsters in this version, though traditionally they're robots. And these will attempt to take the shortest path to you. If they fall into a hole that you've drilled, they get stuck. They don't fall through all the way. And they can clamber out after a few seconds, but if the hole fills in on them, then they're destroyed and they respawn somewhere else on the screen. The monsters can pick up gold as they're walking around, and if they fall into a hole, then they drop what they were carrying. So if the exit ladder doesn't appear when you collect the last piece of gold, then you need to shove some monsters into lockers. One useful thing about the monsters is that you can run on top of them, something that the game will require you to do in order to solve puzzles. One odd aspect of Super Lode Runner is that the stage isn't scaled to fit the television screen. There's a very small amount of vertical scrolling, and a fairly significant amount of horizontal scrolling. There's no way to halt the action and look at what's happening around you, and stages will require that you manipulate off-screen enemies to be in exactly the right place. Super Lode Runner adds a few additional features to Lode Runner, and the best of these is a 2-player mode that has a unique set of stages. The other modifications Irem made to Lode Runner are not as successful. Things like invisible blocks. That is a terrible concept for stage design. Naturally, there is a level editor that you can use to make your own Lode Runner stages, and at least in this case, you can save them to the floppy disk. There's room to save 20 levels of your making. I want to drill down into level 6 because it's a good example of what Super Lode Runner is like and how it goes so wrong. Most of stage 6 is dominated by this giant blob of brick in the middle, and while not aesthetically pleasing, it's a common obstacle for Lode Runner, figuring out how you have to drill out enough space while not becoming trapped yourself. There's 2 major obstacles to overcome with this layout in level 6 though. First, there's the gold in the bottom right. The only way that you can get to it is by drilling out the top and falling from above. If you come at it from the side, you'll get trapped. But after you've collected that gold, if you want to get back up, then the only way to do that is by walking on top of the head of the monster and hoping that it wanders in the correct direction. The monster movement, especially when you're aligned vertically, has a bit of randomness to it. and this one can just wander off in the wrong direction while you're trying to use it as a bridge. The other challenge is much worse. If you were to dig down through that mountain of bricks and get the gold out, there's only one place that you can emerge, and if you do this, then you become trapped. There's no space to drill anything out that you can get down. But there is that suspicious-looking hole there. If you could lead a monster into it, then you could climb on top of it. You can't do this to the monster up top, because the spot where you could stand to drill it out results in you clinging to the overhead bar instead. You could kill the monster by drilling out the other side and getting it trapped, but then it could appear anywhere, including places where it couldn't follow you down to that gap. The actual solution is to drill out this brick here. There's a monster trapped inside it. This is a totally new feature to Super Lode Runner, something that you would never know to look for. You'd just have to try drilling out random bricks until you find them. The monster could still become trapped in the brick that you drill it out of and die, so you have to position yourself in a way that it will climb out the hole on the left-hand side instead of the right. Then you want to guide it into the gap at the bottom, but the monster will always pathfind to the left. That's where it could go up or down to chase after you. The solution here is to position yourself directly underneath the brick that it will land on, and then hope. The monster has a small chance of going to the right instead of the left if you do this. There's no way to make the monster behave consistently, so all you can do is set it up and hope the monster wanders off in the correct direction. Then, finally, you can execute the rest of the stage perfectly and climb out. You get 3 lives, and if you get a game over, then your progress is automatically saved, so you can work on any stage forever. There's also score in the game, but it doesn't really amount to anything. If the first piece of gold that you collect is marked with the S, or if you manage to clear the stage without killing any monsters, then you get bonus points at the end. But that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. There are 55 stages in the main game, and 15 stages designed for 2 players, so to go to something this absurd at level 6, well, Super Lode Runner immediately jumps to unfair. I am rather pleased to know that I was not alone there. Apparently, Stage 6 is notorious in Japan for just stopping players dead. Needless to say, Super Lode Runner is not the version of Lode Runner that people remember in Japan. That would be the Hudson games. Still, it was successful enough that Irem released a sequel just a few months later. And we'll get to that soon enough. My take is, well, yeah, Irem has the worst of the Lode Runners. Hudson's port of Lode Runner is more directly related to the original computer version, it plays better, and it has better level design. Even Championship Lode Runner, Hudson's notoriously impossible sequel, is more of a fair game than Super Lode Runner. The only reason you'd want to give this a look is if you're playing all of the Lode Runner games. Law of the West is a game with a reputation in Japan. It's remembered for being bizarre, weird, strangely violent, cartoony, and a bit incomprehensible. Now that said, this is only about the Famicom version. The original Commodore 64 version's a classic. And in bringing it to the Famicom, Tosei and Pony Canyon made some interesting choices. You play as the sheriff of a small western town, and all the game consists of are 11 scenes where you encounter a person who walks in and have a brief conversation with them. You'll make 3 choices in the conversation, and you'll have 4 lines to choose for each of them. In every conversation, there's a peaceful resolution where the person walks away, and a violent one where they pull a gun on you. Some conversations also give you added benefits. Stay on the good terms with the doctor, and he'll patch you up an extra time if you're shot. Or you could get some information out of people. At any time you can just press up on the D-pad to draw your gun. When they're walking in, the characters won't like that you have your gun out, but after that, you can swing your Colt around as much as you like. You have unlimited ammo and unlimited shots. No need to waste time reloading. In every scene there's a hidden money bag when you shoot the correct spot. But more dramatically, while you're talking to people, these guys in white will show up in the background. They're just killers. And if you don't shoot them, then in the middle of your conversation with someone, they'll kill that person. On any scene with the bank, you'll also see them dash out the door and you can shoot them for a lot of points. I'm not sure why they chose white for the bad guys that you can shoot. Everyone knows the rules in westerns are good guys wear white hats, bad guys wear black hats. Of course, if you really want to end conversations fast, you could always just shoot the person as they're walking out. There's no consequences if you choose to gun down all 11 people you meet in the game. It just means you don't have a high score. This is a pretty slow game since you have to watch someone slowly walk in, then watch them slowly walk out, then watch the score for that conversation slowly total up. Even if you're slow like me, most of your time in Law of the West is going to be spent waiting for something to happen. If you do take too long in the conversations, a bomb drops out of the sky and kills whoever you're talking to. This is a super short game. If you just go through the conversation trees, you'll finish it in about 15 minutes. There's no actual ending or overarching story linking all the scenes. You just get to the end and see what your final score is. In Japan, the game is considered to be decently written, but the text is riddled with typos. And that just lends itself to its offbeat reputation there. The order of conversations is always the same too. The burly drunk who's a coward. The town doctor who's also drunk. The farmer who just bought a new shotgun and is showing it off to everyone. The crazy gambler. The, quote, hostess, unquote. The candy-loving boy. Your timid deputy. A cattle-rustling woman. The Mexicali kid. The local schoolmarm. And finally, a hitman who's come after you. You can get shot once before you die, and if that happens, you have a bandage on your arm. Of course, you could always convince the doctor to patch you up. And that's all there is to Law of the West. All those things that made you go, huh, that's weird, were added by Tosei when the game was ported. Although Law of the West wasn't popular at the time, it's gotten a cult following. It's a bit simple, and it's a lot weird, but that seems to be what people like about it. I actually kind of like Mickey Mouse-capade, even if I typoed it with an extra S here. I got a lot of fun out of it over the years. Mickey Mouse on the Famicom, not so much. I definitely don't remember Mickey Mouse-capade being this hostile to players. It probably doesn't help that my cart may be cursed. I was plagued by graphical glitches, and on multiple occasions I just spontaneously went to the next stage. You might be familiar with how this game was released by Capcom in the US. That's just a case of the Disney license changing hands and Hudson already having a game ready to go that Capcom could pick up. Obviously, this is our first Disney game on the Famicom. In Japan, Disney seemed to spread the licenses around, so Capcom's got their games, Hudson has this one, and eventually Kemco releases their own Mickey Mouse game. Kind of strange how it walks around so much. The full title of this one is Mickey Mouse Fushigi no Kuni no Daiboken, which would be Mickey Mouse Adventures in Wonderland, since Fushigi no Kuni no Daiboken is the Japanese title of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And the game actually uses a lot of characters from the Disney film, plus Peter Pan for some reason. Mickey Mouse is a 5-stage long action platformer It has a few very odd standout elements to it. The most immediately obvious one is that you're not just playing as Mickey Mouse. You control both Mickey and Minnie. Though Minnie doesn't really help you, and in fact, she's a lot more likely to get in your way. Minnie's movements are on a slight delay to Mickey's, and that can result in things like missing jumps, or having to carefully manipulate her position so you can exit a screen. It's incredibly annoying in play, and she really doesn't add anything to the game. She can get a second slower shot if you find the right item late in the game, and the fact that she's invincible means that you can use her as a human mouse shield, but in typical play, she just gets in your way. The worst is when she's abducted by this bird. You're not allowed to complete the stage unless you find her. And to find her, you have to locate these invisible spots that have keys in them. The invisible spots are randomly spawned every time you change screens. And that's good, because when you get the key, you go to this room where you have a 1 in 4 chance of finding Minnie. If you go here while you have Minnie, then you can pick out fairies until you find the bad one, and how many fairies you get determines what prize you get. Those invisible spots that you shoot are some of the quirkiest parts of this game. You'll find plenty of items in them, and sometimes even a path. As for the items you can find in them, a diamond increases your health bar by 1, while this Donald Duck face restores your life bar to full. You can also find fairies that'll make you invincible for a short while, and this Hudson Bee that destroys all enemies on the screen. There's a few different styles of stages in Mickey Mouse. The first, fourth, and fifth stage have you go room to room, and you're essentially looking for keys or a boss, or both. The second and third stages are side-scrolling. On the second stage, you just have to get to the end, while the third is one of those mazes that 8-bit games seem to like, where you just have to pick the right door 4 times in a row. You actually start out weaponless in Mickey Mouse. So for the first few screens, you have to avoid enemies until you get to this chest where you pick up an eraser. Using the eraser, you can defeat this guy, who will get you a key to that door, so you can beat the boss, so you can get the key to the first door. Does this make Mickey Mouse a Metroidvania? I'm going to say yes, just because I know that'll make some people annoyed. A problem I have with this game is that your shots feel inconsistent. Part of that is because some enemies can't be damaged until they activate. And part of that is because sometimes enemies just seem to take more shots. For enemies that shoot at you, your shots will hit their bubbles first. That can be a real challenge because they release a continuous stream of shots. There's no gap for you to time to shoot through, so all you can do is just try to overpower them. And the bosses do a ton of damage as well. Some of them are even instantly fatal if you touch them. The game doesn't feel very fair either. The way that some things can spawn in and hit you as you're jumping over holes, or the way that you just can't hit some things, those just aren't much fun. If you get a game over, there is a continue code that's printed in the manual. But why use a continue code when you could just use a level skip? Press and hold select, then press and hold a direction, then press start. As for Mickey Mouse, I can't recommend it. Hudson's competent at making games, and the movement and jump controls for Mickey are just fine. But for Minnie? That's a real problem, and it's not the only one. Without the license, this is just a below-average platforming game. It's fine by the standards of early 1987, but Hudson has already done better than this. Just to let you know before I get started, Tobidase Daisakusen has an anaglyphic 3D mode, so if you have a pair of red and blue 3D glasses, you might want to keep those handy. Square's Disc Original group is giving us some real dogs on the Disc system. But I think Tobidase Daisakusen is the best game that they made for the platform. Or at least it's the most coherent, best playing game that they released. And it's the snowflake that sets off the avalanche. Not because it is, as the box says, the first game in the Tobidase series, because it also happens to be the only game in the Tobidase series. There will be a cartridge-based sequel, but they really downplay that Tobidase branding. The reason Tobidase Daisakusen is important is it's the first console game programmed by Nasir Gebeli. Nasir, and I'll just call him by his first name because that's how he was usually credited, was born in Iran, his family left the country during the revolution, and then he gained a reputation as a brilliant programmer for the Apple II in the early days of computing. He picked up early on how the Nintendo Entertainment System would be the next big thing, and then flew to Japan and through some contacts, landed a job at Square. Tobidase Daisakusen is a technical masterpiece, but a very poor seller, like all too many Disk System games. And this poor response to their Disc Original games left Square in a financially precarious situation. But salvation came in the form of a new game programmed by Nasir. A game that became a smash hit. That reinvigorated the entire company. And of course, that game was Highway Star. Considering that Highway Star is clearly modeled on Outrun, and Tobidase Daisakusen is clearly modeled on Space Harrier, I get the impression that Nasir was a big Sega fan. The plot of the game is that you're Jack, a guy who travels between planets, and he gets a call from Cindy who wants him to kill a dragon. There you go, that's the entire story. You spend most of the game running across the planet. There's 8 worlds, though I think they're all supposed to be on the same planet, and they consist of 4 stages each. The A button jumps, and the B button fires, if you have a weapon. And really the game just consists of surviving the environment long enough to reach the end of the world where you can kill the dragons that are there. As you're running around the planet, you'll see pillars, and if you run into those, a useful item may be popped out the top. The missile will let you shoot. And if you get the, well, it's supposed to be boots, but it looks more like a potion to me. Anyways, you collect it, and you can defeat enemies that you land on top of. Both of those power-ups go away if you run into an enemy. There's also a mushroom that is poisonous to collect, a heart that will give you an extra life, and this atom-looking thing that will make you invincible for a few seconds. How long you're invincible depends on your elevation when you grab it. If you pick it up off the ground, you only get about 3 seconds. If you jump up into the air, you might get as many as 10 seconds. Also, while you're invulnerable, you still lose the ability to jump on enemies or fire your gun if you hit any enemies. So the invulnerability is just really not worth it. There's one more item that can pop out of those towers, and that's the clock. It refills your timer, which is the line of boxes at the bottom of the screen. On some of the longer stages, you will have to collect a clock or 2 in order to get through. There are a couple other pickups that are just lying around. Stars can be found anywhere, and they're worth bonus points at the end of the world. And balloons will take you to a special bonus area. You'll always want to go to these because they inevitably contain something good, like an extra life or a clock. You've got some very slight control over your speed by pressing up and down, but there's really only 3 levels of speed. You'll want to use those variations as you're jumping over the pits that are common on stages. The platforming in this game is rough, and a mistake of any kind is fatal. It's especially bad on World 3, where you have to use these, they look like frogs to me, but I guess they're springs. Anyways, you have to use them to make very long jumps. And in particular, consecutive jumps. The only way to do this is to run into them, because landing on top of anything consistently is nearly impossible here. And then move at the constant average speed, because that will result in you landing on the next spring. It's a messy way to do it, but it works. At the end of the world, you'll fight a dragon, or dragons. They all move exactly the same. They're segmented, bounce up and down, and come at you. I found it a bit difficult to judge their actual position, so I'd recommend just getting out of the way and staying out of the way. And because they don't have multiple bosses, instead they just make you fight the dragons multiple times. So in Worlds 2 and 3 you have to fight the dragon twice, In Worlds 4 and 5, you have to fight it 3 times. It doesn't get harder, it just gets more repetitive. One unique feature about Tobidase Daisakusen is the 3D mode. Press select and the game will switch to an anaglyphic 3D view. Anaglyphic is where it's red and blue colored. Now if you happen to be wearing anaglyphic glasses right now and it's not working for you, that's because you're wearing them backwards. For virtually all media that uses anaglyphic glasses, the blue lens is on the right and the red lens is on the left. However, that's reversed here, so flip those around. Otherwise you're just going to see double images. The game came with a paper set of glasses in the box, but you could also purchase a plastic set, and these plastic glasses are a fairly rare collectible now. If you get a game over, then there is a continue, but you have to use a cheat code. Hold down A and press start to continue from the start of the world you were on. Otherwise, you go back to the beginning of the game. In Japan, Tobidase Daisakusen doesn't seem to be especially well remembered. Most people seem to only be able to identify it because it's Nasir's first console game. Well, that and the obvious Space Harrier connection. I'm not going to say Tobidase Daisakusen is a bad game. It's just it's on the level of decent. It gets pretty repetitive really quickly, the shooting action isn't the greatest, and it's really hard to tell if you're in front of or behind something, despite that being part of the core mechanic of the game. But it's not bad. It's just kind of a, well, that's nice game. The technical tricks are impressive, but not really outstanding. It feels like this game just needed a little bit more. Maybe more enemies, a little bit better shooting, something. Because otherwise, it just goes on the pile of fine games that no one would remember, or at least wouldn't remember except for its historical connection. You know those games where they don't really have anything to do with the license they're about? It's pretty clear that another game was being made, and then late in development someone goes, "Oh, we've got this license." So they switch out the characters and call it a day? That's City Adventure Touch, and it's the most infamous example of this in Japan. Touch started as a comic about twin baseball stars Tatsuya and Kazuya. They're both competing for the affections of their childhood friend Minami. And it's a combination sports romance story. I'll be honest, I'm totally unfamiliar with this one, but apparently it was a monster hit. The game's release was timed to coincide with the airing of the final episode of a television adaptation. Touch is our second game from Compile, and they're still in their developer for hire mode. We won't see what they're really capable of for a little while yet. In the game, the twins and Minami are tasked to go rescue the 10 puppies of this dog monster. As a reminder, this is based on a television show about a romantic triangle between baseball players. You have to travel the city streets, beating up toys the whole way, locating the hidden dungeons and bosses. You'll also have to collect the right items to use in the right spots in order to make paths open, and you'll also have to collect items to use as weapons against the bosses. This is arguably the first belt-scrolling beat-em-up on the Famicom, in the sense that you can wander around freely in those horizontally scrolling stages, and you can punch enemies to defeat them. You typically won't want to punch, you'll throw baseballs instead. The one nod that this is based on a story about baseball players. Still, all the features of the genre are there, and it beat Kunio to this system by a month. You actually control both brothers at once, and Minami just always stays in between them. The B button attacks, and if you hold down the A button you can switch what item you're using. You have to hold A and press left and right to change it though. You have limited inventory spots, and there are a lot of red herring items. If you need to drop something, you have to enter one of these rooms where the dog guy says nothing, and then press A and B at the same time to drop your selected item. The only thing that works as a weapon in the side-scrolling areas is the baseball, which you throw. If it's not selected, then you just punch. You press select to switch between which brother you're controlling. But the other brother always moves and attacks with you. These numbers at the top of the screen serve a dual purpose. They're your health, and they're your money. They're tracked independently for both brothers, and the one that you're not actively controlling can still get hurt and make money, or health. Honestly, it's a really bad system that does not work. What I wound up doing was switching between the brothers, and when I found some especially juicy enemies, I just ground for some cash and health for a little while. There's no invincibility frames for when you get hurt, but I still found it to be pretty simple to just rack up some health. Minami can get hit as well, but as a woman, all she can do is sit on the ground and cry. That's actually everything she does in this game. I guess that's better than having her be kidnapped and being the prize at the end of the game, but not by that much. Setting that aside, the big problem with Touch is that it's big. Really big. It's a vast world consisting of thousands of screens and dozens of these interlocked little stages. And the way that they connect is non-Euclidean. You can go forward or back, walk over a little bit, and then return in the direction from where you came, and where you wind up won't be part of the road that you initially left. Along with that vast size, there's hundreds of enterable locations, and only a very small handful of those are relevant. You do get hints from the dog guy, but they're infamous for not being very helpful. One of the better known ones is that he tells you that fire is the only thing that can hurt the tree boss, and then you can buy a lighter, an oil lamp, or matches. And matches are the only thing that works. The game does offer passwords that you can continue where you left off, but there's a problem with the password system. There isn't really a good check on players being able to put in whatever they want. And that resulted in kids passing around a password that got a bit of attention. In essence, it was, "I want to have sex with Minami." That password put you near the end of the game with plenty of health. The story was that the creator of Touch was so infuriated by this that he did not allow Touch to be used for any further video games. Personally, I doubt that story is true, but it's too good not to mention. City Adventure Touch is a strange one. It's technically competent, but the gameplay is so deeply flawed that it overwhelms everything else. I mean, why sell you food items that are used to restore exactly as much health as you paid to get them? At least if you're playing it outside of Japan, you probably won't have the same connection to the source material that makes you wonder how a romance story featuring baseball became this game. For most of these games, the recording session is a challenge of, let's see how far I can go. At about the halfway mark for my recording session of Hana no Star Kaidou, I realized this one was different. It became, can I beat the first stage? And the answer to that was no. The game was released by Victor, and it seems to have come about as a way to push two new stars, Hatano Moeta and Toyota Goro. Here's the thing about those two guys, though. The only things I can find about them on the Japanese internet are this game. So assuming that they were a real act, they vanished without a trace. Somehow, this is the third game in a row that I've played where you control two characters simultaneously. 3 out of 4 of the Famicom action games that I can think of that do this were released in the space of 2 weeks. Did everybody just simultaneously decide to mimic Binary Land? I know I complained about how annoying Minnie was in Mickey Mouse. She is a bastion of perfect control compared to Hana no Star Kaidou. You control Moeda and Goro simultaneously. Moeda is the one on the left, Goro is the one on the right. No, I don't know why they have an A and a U on their shirts. You can adjust the distance between them by pressing up and down on the pad. And you will need to tweak it to try to make some of the jumps. They jump almost simultaneously, and as a consequence of that, a lot of the trickier jumps become pixel perfect to get both of them across. The B button attacks and the A button jumps, but also if you hold down the B button while you're moving, you can go up the escalators to the train stations. They'll take you to different side-scrolling maps, but there aren't that many of them. Your goal on every stage is to collect 10 items and get to the place where you're supposed to play music. On the first stage, it's golden discs and a small concert venue in Harajuku. I'm told that later stages take you to the JVC studio, almost as if they published the game, Budokan, and Madison Square Garden. Many of the items you have to collect on the way to your performance are hidden, and you'll have to work out exactly where you need to step to trigger them. On the other hand, they also respawn, so you can keep collecting the same ones over and over again, as long as you go far enough away or travel to another section of the level. There's also a way that you can lose collectibles. If you stand still for about a second and a half, an object will fall out of the sky on top of you. If you have a collectible and you're hit by a projectile, you lose one. If you don't have any collectibles, then you lose a life. Lives are tracked separately from Moeda and Goro. They each start with 3, and if either of them runs out of all their lives, then it's game over. As for how you deal with enemies, when you break out your microphone and sing at them, it stuns them for a moment, and you have to shoot a second time to defeat them. Except for this biker who's apparently indestructible, and drives back and forth on the bottom of the screen forever. The hearts along the top of the screen are a timer. If they run out, then both characters just drop dead. I'm not sure that there's enough time to get through the entire stage before it runs out either. There's no way to refill it except by dying. There's one power-up that I have found. This guitar makes you invincible for a short period. It actually lasts quite a while too. So obviously, Hana no Star Kaidou is just about unplayable. Even Japanese sources I've found say that clearing stage 1 is a major accomplishment. The ultra-precise platforming is a nightmare, and since it only takes one hit to kill Moeda and Goro, you can easily lose lives in the first few seconds of the game. Hana no Star Kaidou is a game that's almost entirely forgotten in Japan, and I think that's because they've tried to block it from their collective memories. Now it's time for me to move on, and hope that I can forget about it too. Goonies II, the game that confused so many of us. The story's well known now, of course, and if you've watched my earlier videos, then you've already seen the first Goonies game. But so many of us were wondering, where is Goonies 1? I figured it was the Goonies computer game. And plenty of other people assumed that the movie was Goonies 1, and the game was a sequel to the movie. In Japan, the game has a subtitle, Forelli Saigo no Chosen, or The Forelli's Final Challenge. There's actually a cutscene that introduces the story, where Ma Forelli appears on television to tell the Goonies that she's kidnapped their mermaid friend Annie. Konami must have really liked that villain talking to you to introduce the story on television, because they wind up using it in a lot of games. All of the Goonies fail to rescue Annie and are captured, except Mikey, who now has to go in alone and save everybody. And this game is another sprawling action-adventure game where you have to wander long hallways, find key items, and explore areas looking for hidden objects. But unlike so many other action-adventure games that we've seen so far, I think Goonies II works. Mostly. We'll talk about its one major failing in a little bit. The thing is, in games like Masho or Touch, which had these vast worlds that you needed to explore to find items, the worlds were too big and too generic. A lot of identical locations meant that it was very easy to get lost. The level design in Goonies 2 is actually good. There's a lot of clever signposting with things like how broadly the colors change. The areas are contained enough that it's easy to keep track of your position without resorting to mapping. And I think there's enough distinctive features to make navigating easy. Oh, here's this spot where I had to climb up. I remember that. An interesting quirk of the Goonies 2 map is how it's double layered. Through some of these doors you can cross over into what's called the back side of the map. I never found it to be confusing though, because it doesn't really matter if you're on the front side or the back side. They're just distinct areas linked by these first-person tunnels. But those first-person areas are the worst aspect of Goonies 2. They're always from the same perspective. You can't rotate left or right. And that can mean that there are doorways behind you that you can't see. There's also lots of hidden items in these areas. Things like power-ups hidden in the walls, or additional passages. And the consequence of that is in every single room, you have to punch the wall, hit all the surfaces with the hammer, and look around while wearing the glasses that reveal invisible items. Or you could use a guide. It's not as bad as it could be because there aren't a whole lot of rooms to check, but it's unnecessarily tedious. The first-person views also have one of my least favorite interface design choices. When you're using items, you have to hit B to go to a second page. There's no real reason to implement it that way. It's just confusing. There aren't many puzzles, but there are some things like hit this old woman in the head repeatedly to get her to give up a key item. Also in the first-person rooms, you might find Konami Man who will refill your entire life, or one of the Goonies locked up in a cage. Getting the keys to those cages is a bit of a pain. You can only carry a few keys at a time, and you need them to open safes as well as the cages. Enemies drop keys, usable weapons, and health, but they do this very rarely. Early on, you'll probably have to stop and grind for keys for a while in order to open up the next section. Your primary weapon in Goonies 2 is a yo-yo. In fact, the sticker on the box is for a yo-yo giveaway. You can get a ranged attack with a slingshot. It has limited ammunition though. You can also find this boomerang. I find it kind of difficult to use. It takes too long to travel and come back. Be careful if you're using it while crossing the bridge. These skulls will eat the boomerang and fly away. There are two sub-weapons you can activate by pressing up and hitting B. The bomb drops at your feet, and it works a lot like the bomb in the first Goonies game. It can also be used to reveal secrets. The firebombs are thrown, and that makes them good for taking out some nastier enemies. Though don't bother trying to fight the demon. He's just too tough and does too much damage. You can find some items that will help you in these side-scrolling areas, like this helmet that blocks hits from above, or this raincoat that prevents you from taking damage from water. And of course, there's always scuba gear. These kinds of items really emphasize how Goonies 2 is a sprawling action-adventure game. You might not be able to continue on a path you find at that moment, but perhaps you'll find an item in a little bit that'll let you do that. Goonies 2 came out just over a year after Konami's first Goonies game, and I think comparing the two of them shows how far the system has come in just that 1 year. The larger carts and memory mappers are making an enormous difference. Even with the flaws in Goonies 2, I think this is the game that cements Konami's position as the top developer on the Famicom. Other companies are still struggling to find their way, or haven't really been able to take advantage of the changing technology. Konami, on the other hand, just keeps making high-quality games, and they keep getting better. In early 1987, nobody else even comes close. From the people who brought you Transformers Convoy no Nazo, it's Lost World of Jenny. The short version of events here is that Takara is a toy company. They started out with the rights to manufacture Barbie dolls in Japan, but when they lost the license, they just changed her name to Jenny. That's capital J, lowercase e, capital N, lowercase n, capital Y. And yes, the cover of the game uses a photograph of the doll. Takara was getting into making Famicom games based on their toys, and Jenny was an obvious choice for one. Tosei did the programming on this one, but the company that did the character and game designs was Birthday. I tried to pin down exactly what they do, but their website that has a 2006 copyright date on it wasn't really functional. From what I could find, I believe that they're more of a marketing firm than anything else. They're approached by others to come up with game designs, or books, or other materials like that, and then Birthday handed off their design to Tosei. And what a design it is! Lost World of Jenny has a reputation in Japan as one of the worst Famicom games. I wouldn't put it in my personal bottom 10, but it's definitely down there. The story is Jenny was putting on a musical performance when an evil organization stole the musical score away. She has to travel to 6 different lands to get the keys that will let her unlock the music. Jenny starts in this overworld map where she can wander between one of 7 different stages. The musical won't open up until you have all the keys. The other places she can travel to are a haunted graveyard, a haunted house, a giant flower garden, a giant cake with haunted catacombs below it, a haunted pirate ship, and space, which is not haunted. Confusingly, there's no set order to the stages, but you can't do them in any order. Instead, an order is randomly built every time you start the game. On the overworld, everything can hurt Jenny, and she can't fight back. She gets run down by cars, chewed up by puppies, and shot by secret agents. When you do find the stage that you can go into, it switches to a side-scrolling platformer. On 4 of the stages, the area is dual-layered. You can go left and right, but you can also go up and down between areas. In space and the garden, though, you just have to go all the way to the right. You have 4 goals in the stage. First, open 10 of the items. The caskets, treasure chests, pods, whatever. Doing that makes doors appear, though only one door is the actual exit. For controls, it's the usual B attacks, A jumps. Jenny starts out punching and kicking, but if you press select, she switches to her special weapon, a spray of some kind. The S at the top indicates how much she has, but you can think of that as cans of mace. And you can hold down the button for a little while before you use it up. You can also find pickups on stages that grant you a ranged weapon that doesn't use up the S. To open chests, you have to stand on them and jump. Then you get to see what's inside them. It could be another spray can. It could be this skull, which removes the spray can. It could be a monster that walks on the ground and has a ranged attack. Defeating that monster will typically give you a health recovery. Or it could be a monster that floats around and has a ranged attack. Those monsters are the ones you need to defeat to get the key. They might also drop a letter, and you'll need to remember what letter they drop. The other thing those floating monsters could drop is this bird, which grants an extra life. The other things that you can find laying around are jewelry that makes you temporarily invincible, some high heels that make you run faster, you'd think that would work the other way around, and these pea bags. They're dropped from the regular enemies on stages, and collecting 10 of those gives you an extra S. The thing is, those enemies respawn continuously in the same spots. There's no time limit, so there's nothing stopping you from standing in one place and maxing out your spray count. In fact, I'd strongly recommend doing that. You'll want the spray to use on the enemies that pop out of boxes, and the bosses. There's also these ghosts that throw fireballs. When you defeat them, they drop a number. You'll want to remember that too. So you've opened enough boxes, you've found the monster with the key, and you've escaped out the correct door. Now it's time for Cowhead. This small stage occurs after every single stage, and you have to defeat all the skeletal minotaurs that are in it. After clearing 1 and 2 stages, there's 1 minotaur. After stages 3 and 4, you get 2, and so on. Defeat all of the cow skulls, and then go to the far right to talk to the fortune teller. That is a really unfortunate design. He just offers a slot machine after every stage where you can get some extra points. Once you've cleared all 6 stages, you can go to the musical. Inside isn't a stage, it's this lock. And you have to put each number with each letter together to get the code. Once you unlock it, you get this ending where you get to see all of the enemies. Lost World of Jenny has so many baffling design decisions, it winds up feeling like a simpler Takeshi's Challenge. It feels like a game designed by someone who hadn't designed a game before, and who didn't play it as it was in development. The most interesting thing in the game are the space segments where you can fly around. Lost World of Jenny is also insanely difficult. There are no continues, so you better get that extra life on every stage. Of course, you don't even get a health refill when you complete a stage. The nicest thing I can say about Lost World of Jenny is it's not as bad as it could have been. But that's not a ringing endorsement. Kemco is returning to one of their bigger successes with Nankoku Shirei Spy vs. Spy. Just like the previous game, this one started on computers. And the Japanese title of Nankoku Shirei is a pretty decent way to localize the computer game's original English title of The Island Caper. The sequel streamlines the gameplay a lot, and I think it's a general improvement there, but it still makes some of the same missteps, and I think a few of the changes aren't really that great. Spy vs. Spy started out as a comic strip in Mad Magazine, where 2 spies for unidentified countries plot against each other in ways that often backfire. Neither one of them is the good guy, they're just opposite sides of a conflict. And in the comic strips, it's generally a coin toss for which one winds up coming out on top. In this game, the white spy is definitely placed in the protagonist role. He's always who the first player controls, and he always has better images in the manual. In this game's outing, they're parachuted onto an island and have to recover 3 pieces of a missile. Once they have all 3 pieces in hand, they have to escape to a submarine. There's a time limit on their mission too. If they take too long, then the volcano erupts, destroying the island. When you start the game, you have your choice of 6 maps to play on. The latter ones tend to have distinct features too, like sandbars that you can use to cross between divided islands, but vanish with the tide, or tunnels that connect different spots on the map. What you're looking for on the island will be found in these loose sand patches. You just walk over those and hit the A button. If a piece of the missile's there, then you carry it around with you. And if you find an additional piece of the missile, then you connect it and you have 2 pieces together. If someone manages to collect all 3 pieces, then the music changes to let you know that time is short. You can also find sticks and knives in the sand piles, and those are useful for beating on the other spy if they get too close. When you suddenly appear in one screen, mash that A button to take them out. The big feature in the previous Spy vs. Spy game was the traps, and they're back for this one. Press the B button while you're walking around to cycle through what you're doing. The shovel digs a hole. Someone can fall into it. They can also move back and forth rapidly to get out of it. That's true for most situations where you're stuck. The rope gets tossed up into a tree to make a snare, and that suspends anybody who gets close to the tree. For the coconut, you have to climb the tree and place it up there. If someone gets close, it falls on them and stuns them for a few seconds. It's a non-lethal trap, too. It just knocks out a little bit of life. The landmine gets buried in a pile of sand, just like other items you can find. Walking over it or digging it up is lethal. And that's it for the traps. It feels like a step backward when the only things you can interact with are the grounds and the trees. And there's no reason to interact with the trees unless you're setting a trap. There are no tools to avoid the traps this time, but you can stay away from the trees, and the map will show you where the missile parts are. You get to the map by cycling the B button past the traps, and since you can see where the missile parts are, if you check it, you can avoid any traps that are on the ground. It actually winds up making the traps feel kind of useless. The best thing you can do with them is block off paths. Environmental hazards are a big threat in this game. You can make your way through quicksand or swim a short distance, but it drains your life to do that. On some maps, you can step right off the island into deep water, and there's no way to recover from that until you drown. If you hold down the B button, you can run, and while you're running, if you press A, you'll jump, and that'll get you over some obstacles. One thing to be cautious about running: on some stages you'll overheat if you run too long, and that reverses your controls. There's one more thing to be aware of in this game, and that's how the submarine moves. Your exit point from the island is not always in the same place. It circles the island clockwise, so sometimes you might want to go to where it will be rather than where it is. I felt like the AI was greatly improved for the sequel. Perhaps part of that has to do with how much simpler it is to collect the items, and part of it might have to do with how you can't just trap the same narrow path over and over again. Either way, the enemy spy is aggressive and fast. Naturally, the way you're supposed to play Spy vs. Spy the Island Caper is by having a second player control the other spy. That one wasn't an option for me. I think that the improvements made to Nankoku Shirei Spy vs. Spy make it a better game than the original, but it's still not great. It still feels very confined and limited. The improved backgrounds do help with navigation a bit, but there's still a lot that feels kinda the same. I'd say if you were going to play a Spy vs. Spy game, then this is the one to play, but I'd also say that you don't really need to. One thing about doing these episodes consecutively is that sometimes I find out information about a game way later. In this case, it's because Chite Tairik Odola is part of an entire series of educational games that Sunsoft made in conjunction with textbook publisher Ask Kodansha. We've already seen the first game in this series, Adian no Tsue, and I don't know if I can really call this the second or third game in the series, because the second and third games were released on the same day. At least these are the last two in the series. We'll see the other one, Super Boy Allan, in a few days. March 27th, 1987 was kind of a busy day for the disk system. The focus of Chite Tairik Odola is on decimals. Not really any kind of complicated decimal math, just understanding the relationships. Similar to Adian no Tsue, there are two game modes. One is a race where you complete stages by answering math problems. Here, to enter the answer, you have to highlight the numbers, hit A, and press B when you want a decimal point. If you score perfectly in a round, then you skip the next one. The real meat here is the action game, and it's pretty clear that Sunsoft modeled this on Atlantis no Nazo. And if you know Atlantis no Nazo, you just groaned. That game was one of Sunsoft's first big hits, and it involved an explorer traversing caverns, attacking monsters with some very delayed bombs, and having to find many painfully hidden secrets. And all of that carries over to Chite Tairik Odola. Your goal in the game is to explore the underground continent, and that means making your way through 30 stages of platforming. You have to find a few key items to advance past certain blocks in the game, and those items are hidden invisibly across the previous 10 areas. If you miss one, then you'll have to go backwards, and to do that you'll have to find invisible warps. Hopefully you didn't stumble into an invisible warp that forced you to skip ahead of items that you required. Yeah, this one's a bit of a mess. The A button jumps and the B button throws bombs. They'll hit the ground and then explode after a few seconds. On the positive side of things, you can hurt some enemies by throwing bombs directly into them. You don't have to wait for them to explode. On the negative side, finding hidden items and opening up passages requires that your bomb land exactly in the correct spot and then explode. So if it was slightly misaligned, then you don't get it, and there's a good chance you'll think that you've already checked that spot. The bats that bounce up and down from the ceiling are invulnerable, but you can hit the creatures that crawl along the floor. The ones that you really want to get are the little monsters that bounce up and down. When you hit one of these with a bomb, the game stops and you have to answer a math problem. And here, hitting up and down change the value, hitting left and right alter what you're editing, sometimes. Other times it enters what you have as the solution, or hitting the A button enters the solution. Having 3 different interfaces to put in your answers to these math problems is not confusing at all, and it definitely didn't cause me to misenter a lot of things. Look, with all of its other faults, this is still intended to be an educational game. And that means consistency is important. Players shouldn't first have to think about what method they're going to use to enter the solution. Moving on from there, you have to collect 3 correct answers, and then at the end of the stage, you can use a bomb on a spot and it will open the passage to the next area. There is one item that you can find that you're able to use, and that's this log which is set across a hole when you press down and B if you're in exactly the right spot. Don't go back looking for more math problems to answer though, because if it leaves the screen, it's gone forever. And you can't collect the log again, so you're stuck. This game also has some weirdly difficult platforming, because if you hit your head, you lose your forward momentum. You also look like you slam into walls, but you still have some air control even as you're kind of flattened against the surface. You have 3 lives, and when you get a game over, you're given the option to save your progress or continue. Shockingly, kids in Japan at the time hated this game. I know, go figure. Nobody has fond memories here, though it's not like it's a popular bad game to go back and revisit either. And yeah, this game has horrible action, horrible stage design, includes that awful thing from 1987 where they hide everything you need to progress, and they didn't even integrate the math especially well with the game. Chite Tairik Odola is one of the more unpleasant things I've played on the FDS. My fingers are crossed that that 3rd educational game that Sunsoft released isn't nearly as bad as this. used to be that one of the most common videos you could find on old games was 10 hidden gems for this console. I don't know if they still do that. I generally block any video that has that kind of title. Otogi is a common game to come up in any conversation about hidden 8-bit gems. It has a unique premise, unlike anything any other game has ever done. It plays decently enough, though I do have some problems there. And there's a significant historical connection. The woman on the front of the box for Otogi really doesn't have any connection to the game. She's Natsuki Ozawa, a popular singer in the mid-80s who was hired to be the spokeswoman for Otogi. And as far as I can tell, that mainly consisted of having her picture on the front of the box. The people who actually developed it were Toshio Iwai and Tsunekazu Ishihara. This was the first video game for each of them. Iwai is an artist whose career has focused on merging music and interactivity. His best-known work outside of Japan is probably Electroplankton for the Nintendo DS. Ishihara is someone who bounced around the video game industry in Japan for quite a while, acting as a coordinator bringing together people for things like Mother 2. And he really hit it big figuring out how to market pocket monsters to children. The plot of the game is, well, there isn't one. Otogi is not designed for that kind of thing. It's a musical experience. You don't need something like plot getting in the way of that. Instead, the concept of the game is something like a shoot-'em-up. You're flying a little ship around, and if you hold down the A button and press in a direction, you'll fire a ball out and it'll bounce back. Your goal on the 12 stages is to collect enough musical notes to fill a meter at the bottom of the screen, and then take on a giant music symbol in a boss battle. Now that doesn't sound like much, but there is a lot happening here. For one thing, if you hold down the A button and push in a direction, you'll keep firing every time the ball bounces back to you. And you'll notice something if you just try to hit the A button to fire, you really only shoot on the beat of the background music. Your ship also plays a different note every time it fires, depending on what direction you're shooting in. So if you hold down the fire button and start moving around, then you'll get some tones to accompany that stage's song. The results can be pretty good, or at least they can make you think, oh, this is kind of neat to play with. The problem is, this is kinda bad from a shoot-'em-up standpoint. As you fly through the infinitely looping stages, you'll see bubbles that have notes in them, and you have to shoot those to collect them. And you also have to shoot enemies to knock them out of your way. As the stage loops, the bubbles that you've collected are gone and replaced with enemies. Your ship moves extremely slowly, which makes it hard to both dodge enemies and get lined up so that you can collect items. They have a bad tendency to fly off the screen very quickly. And because you're locked into shooting on beats, plus you have to be pushing in a direction to fire, it becomes oddly difficult to hit anything. The action is not especially good. The stages do have some cute gimmicks in how enemies and notes move around them, though you don't really interact with the backgrounds yourself. You can just shoot the spots that have musical notes on them to make something appear. Colliding with an enemy will hurt you, making you spin and unable to fire for a few seconds. This also reduces the size of your bullet, and if you get hit 5 times, then it's game over, or back to the beginning of the song at least. There are some collectibles that are useful. Getting an A will change your musical instrument, and that's effectively changing your weapon. You start every stage with the organ, which has very limited range, and then every stage has a set of instruments that you cycle through, presumably selected because of how they would accompany the music. These weapons have different properties. I was going to run through these, but there's a catch. There's 30 different instruments in the game, and I would be hard-pressed to tell the difference between most of them, at least in terms of weapon firing. So when you're playing, the best thing you can do is collect an A to get off of the organ, and then don't worry too much about it. It's not a linear upgrade, so just take what you can get and be happy. Collecting the B gives you a secondary attack. This attack doesn't make any sound, it just fires a spread of bullets. The pattern of the spread of bullets changes every time you collect one of those B icons, and you have a limited number of these shots, but they replenish every time you collect a B. There's also 3 icons that change the music. The record gives you a double shot. The fast forward icon speeds up the stage and song. And finally, the stop stops the music for a few seconds as well as the scrolling. Once you've collected enough notes, you fade out and go to fight your big musical symbol. Usually a note, but it's not the only thing. And all of these battles are effectively identical and kind of trivial. Just aim at the holes in the symbol, and every time you hit it, your gauge will deplete a little. Every once in a while, one of those holes will spit out a circle of enemies, but don't worry about it, just keep filling in those holes, and when your meter runs out, you've won. These are incredibly anticlimactic. You can save your progress in Otoki when you get a game over, and there's a few things that you unlock by completing stages. First, there's a background music mode, where you can just play and not get hurt. You can change things like your instrument by hitting select, and that will rotate through the options at the bottom of the screen, then press start. When you're ready to quit, cycle over to end and hit start on that one. The really important thing comes up if you beat stage 7. That unlocks Music Maker mode. And here you could play something similar to the background music mode, or you can completely edit every aspect of the music in the game. You can record snippets of your play, and then have it cycle those riffs back to you, or look at all the notes laid out in a rather unhelpful format, and edit everything. You can even play the actual stages with your music substituted in. There are still people who tinker with Otoki, making versions of popular songs for the game. Despite that, Otoki is not a popular game in Japan. Not that people seem to hate it, just that nobody seems to know it exists. This is a game that just doesn't get any attention at all there. The impression I got from trying to dig up opinions on it is more that it's just unknown, rather than disliked. I've got complicated feelings about Otoki. On the one hand, I don't think very much of it as a game. It's slow, it's clunky, the musical mechanics get in the way of the fun. On the other hand, I really like Otoki as an experience. As you're playing, every once in a while you'll go, oh, that sounded really cool. It's a fascinating concept. I guess I come down on the side of recommending checking it out, but tempering your expectations. It's a nifty experiment that's a forerunner of the modern rhythm game, but it's also an early evolutionary step that's not really fully formed. Super Boy Allan is the third game that I'm looking at in Sunsoft's educational game series. My feeling about the previous two was that Aiden no Tsue was reasonably thoughtful as an educational game, but the gameplay had some real problems. Chite Tairik Ordola, which was released on the same day as Super Boy Allan, was a total disaster. Almost unplayable action, and educational content that was especially shallow. And here's Super Boy Allan. He's here to teach you fractions and looks suspiciously familiar. I think it's the best of the three, but that is a super low bar. As with the other two games in this series, there are actually two games on the disc. One side with the titular game, Super Boy Allan, and the other side with Step Drill, which is just a series of math problems presented as a massive race around the entire United States. There are 40 lessons of 5 questions each, and if you get all of the answers correct in a lesson, then you get to skip the next one. You always start entering your answer with the denominator, and you hit B to switch to the numerator. Okay, that's the uninteresting one. Let's look at Super Boy Allan itself. In Super Boy Allan, your sister is very sick. Fortunately, you're the strongest boy in the world, and you should be able to go get the magic herb that will heal her. Except the way is blocked by math problems. Every room in Super Boy Allan has a bunch of monsters roaming around it, a math problem featuring fractions in the lower left, and a jumbled up screen where it's kind of hard to tell what's going on. The round drum-like things are logs that have been cut into slices. Some of these will have numbers or symbols on them, and the important one is the one that has the question mark in an arrow. Your goal is to get the answer to that problem positioned so that the arrow is pointing at it. To do that, you can shove the logs around the screen, but the logs can only roll in the direction that they're round. But if you walk up to a log and you can't roll it, then if you hit the B button, you'll spin it to face you. Or I guess that's not really facing you, since facing you would be the broadside. You're rotating it so you can roll it. After that, you can push that log around. If you've got a bunch of logs lined up, then you can shove all of them at once. Or at least up to the number of your strength, which is in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. It's possible to squish a monster with a log, though that's usually not an efficient way to do it. You can also kick logs by hitting the A button as it starts moving, and that will send it sliding as far as it can go. If you can get the correct answer lined up with that question mark, then all the monsters on the screen go away, and the question mark becomes an item. There's various foods that will restore your strength, rope, which is the most vital item that you can have, and I'll explain it in a moment, and once you've collected certain power-ups, there are axes that will let you clear paths. Something you might have already noticed is that most of the exits are already clear. There is nothing requiring that you solve that math problem. You can just advance to the next screen. In fact, if you go into the game's dungeons, there's no math problems at all. Solving math problems just gets you reusable resources, and if you do enough math problems, then you'll increase your strength, letting you push a longer line of logs. You will have to get your strength up to 10 to open a path to the end of the game, though. Something useful for this is that if you leave and re-enter a screen, the math problem refreshes. So if you find an easy screen, then you can always repeat it as much as you need to. Something that you'll notice very quickly as you play is that getting through many rooms and solving many of those math problems is impossible. The logs can't be moved by pushing them into a position that will let you through. To deal with this, you have rope. Walk up to a log when it's facing the appropriate direction, hold down B and move back. You'll pull the log one square, and it will cost you one rope. This reliance on rope, and how finite it is, means that it is very possible to get stuck in Super Boy Allan. In that event, you can press select to bring up a menu. There's three options here: return to the game, get a hint, and restart, which will teleport you back to the starting room of the game with all of your resources intact. Something that you can find on certain screens is a star that will make you invincible until you leave that screen. This item is always hidden underneath a log that you have to push. But once you have it, then you don't have to worry about getting beaten up. If you do get killed by the monsters, well, then you can save your progress, though when you start up again, you're always in the first room of the game. Looking at Super Boy Allan and the rest of Sunsoft's educational line, I get the distinct impression that these were games that Sunsoft was developing where they might have felt that they weren't quite strong enough to stand on their own, and so math problems were bolted onto them. With Super Boy Allan, it feels like a puzzle game was being developed, something very Sokobone-like, because just applying the numbers to the logs and having one log be the indicator for the solution is a really messy interface when it comes to puzzle design. I did notice that the solution is often in the exact same place for these screens, so there is some slight consideration, though it's not especially helpful, particularly once the monsters get the ability to push the logs around themselves. The puzzles here aren't really fair, and they're not especially deep or interesting. But that said, they are logic puzzles. From a gameplay standpoint, Super Boy Allan gives its players two educational tasks. Super Boy Allan seems to only be remembered for one thing in Japan, and that's how it came with a 150-page comic. It tells the story of a kingdom where fractions came to life and attacked people, along with vegetables. That's the only thing I could find people mentioning about it. Like most educational games, it seems like Super Boy Allan was not especially popular with kids. In this case, I feel like Super Boy Allan is let down by the puzzle design, or rather, the lack of puzzle design. There's too many random elements here, and some of the rooms are just so cluttered up that you really don't have the opportunity to think them through. You just have to go, okay, I can't push that anywhere, can't move that free, well, time to break out the rope. Solving math problems in exchange for power-ups is actually a pretty good idea. That's an aspect of Super Boy Allan that I think works. But the rest of this, well, it's just gonna make you wish you were playing the game it was clearly copied from instead. You know, I'm not sure if March 27th, 1987 was the right time to release Winter Games. The seasons were moving into spring, and the Winter Olympics were almost a full year off. Maybe Summer Games would have been a better choice at this point. Winter Games is a port of Epic's computer game Winter Games, and it is extremely difficult to understate just how big the Epic's Games series was. They've all but vanished from memory for very good reason, but these were everywhere in the 80s. Summer Games was a hit for Epic's in 1984, and they immediately started spawning sequels. All of these games titles got ported to any platform that could possibly run them. They were ubiquitous sports games throughout the 80s. And, just to let you know, they're all not really that good. I'm not going to call Winter Games the low point for the series, but it is definitely down there. One thing that you'll note when starting the game is that it plays a tune that is very obviously derived from John Williams' Olympic fanfare. Epic's did not have permission for that. In the Famicom Disk System version of Winter Games, you can play a series of 4 events. You can play them all as a set, you can compete in them as a nation, or you can practice them. If you choose to compete as a nation, then you'd pick out what nation you're going to be, and enter your name. The only thing that this selection does is change what music plays when you finish. The event selection is odd. The Famicom Disk System version has only half the events of the computer versions, and they chose 2 events that are judgment-based, as in those events where judges hold up scorecards after a performance, and then the other 2 events are time-based. As you might expect, having the computer judge your fancy performances doesn't really work. It makes an already poorly controlling game feel more out of control than ever. The first of these events is what is called freestyle skiing in the Olympics, but here it's called hot dog. You hit the A button to launch yourself into the air, and then you can press in a direction to do a trick. The time you have in the air is pretty short, so you have just enough time to squeeze out 2 tricks if you do it exactly right. You're then given scores out of 10, based on the difficulty of the tricks and how many you performed. Also, if you successfully landed. Speed skating is the obligatory mash the controller as hard as you can to win the race event. This time you're mashing left and right, and you're the character in the bottom screen, not the top. The top screen is just another guy doing their speed skating at the same time. You're not really competing against them. Even if you're somehow amazing at this, you have to do it for almost a minute straight. It is really boring. And then we come to figure skating. A nearly impossible, incredibly unpleasant minigame to play. The gist of it is, during the minute-long event, where you are skating to the skater's waltz, you enter certain button combinations to perform tricks. If you land the trick, then you impress the judges. If you don't land the trick, then you fall down and lose points. Figure skating is judged on a scale of 0 to 6, by the way. Now there are 2 significant problems here. First, the only way you know what inputs you need is to read the manual. Second, you can only input these commands at certain moments. If you try to do it otherwise, nothing happens. And if your timing is bad, or you've entered a command that doesn't match one of the moves, then you fall down. You're going to fall down a lot. Roughly speaking, the timing for entering a trick is when the skater's legs move together. If it's a move where she jumps up into the air, then you have to hit the A button right before you land, otherwise you fall. That's the gist of this one, and the only way you're going to get a positive score is if you practice this event a lot. And why would you? The final event is the luge. You've got a big map of the course that's taking up most of the screen, but what you're really doing is watching your sled in the upper right. Hit down to apply a little bit of brake, and hit left and right to steer around corners. If you go too high on the curve, then you fall and your run is over. And that's everything there is in Winter Games. Like I mentioned, there were 8 events in the computer versions, so this really feels sparse. And as someone who played those computer versions, they really picked a bad set of events here. The slalom and the biathlon would be more interesting than the judged events. And the ski jump is kind of simple, but it was still more fun than speed skating. Winter Games is the only one of Epic's game series that we're going to see. The other ones just didn't get Japanese releases. That is something that is definitely for the best. Obviously, Winter Games on the Famicom disk system is a complete disaster. It's one step shy of unplayable. And if for some reason you did want to play Winter Games, this is the worst version to get. Just stay far away from this one. There was a time when Dirty Pair was the biggest thing out there. Or at least the biggest thing out there for American fans of Japanese animation. And then, suddenly they weren't. At least in that brief window where it could be said that they were popular outside of Japan, this game never made it overseas. It would have made everything worse. Dirty Pair started out as a series of novellas, and they were science fiction stories about a pair of troubleshooting women whose exploits while taking out the bad guys often caused more destruction than the villains did. They rather quickly got animated adaptations, and at the end of 1986, they had a feature film, Dirty Pair Project Eden, and that's what this game is based on. The plot is that on a planet where a critical mineral is being mined, refineries are being attacked. The planet is divided between two hostile superpowers, and to clear up the situation, the lovely angels are sent in. Something that you'll notice while I'm playing that is really obvious is the text at the bottom of the screen that says, "Programmed by UGX." That was intended to be an Easter egg, cut off by television screens, except it's really visible, even on my TV set. Later revisions of the game get rid of that text. In the game, you play as Yuri, at least if you're playing alone. There is a two-player mode, where both players control one of Yuri or Kei, and while there's two different game modes here, the controls are identical for both of them. You hit A to jump, B to shoot, and hit select to access your inventory. There are 10 stages in the game, and the way that they're laid out is you complete 4 side-scrolling stages, where the screen is constantly advancing on its own, and then you have to complete a maze stage, where it's a bit more like a beat-em-up where you can move freely up and down in a room, and you have to explore a bunch of different paths looking for certain items. When it comes to the game Dirty Pair Project Eden, there's 2 things you really should know. First, the game is just about impossibly difficult, and second, it's just about impossibly difficult because it's incredibly broken. You'll just spontaneously die sometimes. That's probably related to the hitboxes not really working properly, and the first stage has a constant flood of enemies that explode after they die, and of course it only takes 1 hit to kill you. If you do manage to make it to the end of a stage, you have to go off the right-hand side of the screen, but that's where all the enemies are continuously spawning in from. Now the good news is, if you can manage to get past the first stage, then the second, third, and fourth stages are significantly easier. Not easy, just easier. The bad news is that the game can crash, and then you're back to stage 1. At least unless you save after you get a game over. You've got infinite continues, and when you reload you'll go back to the stage you died on. But having to go back and do the impossible first stage again was a nice surprise for me. Theoretically, there are items that will help you as you play. And I say theoretically because these items were almost never a help. You've got an inventory at the bottom of the screen, and you access it by hitting select, highlighting the item, and then pressing B. You can only carry one of each particular item at a time, so if you come across another one, you might as well use the one you have. However, when you use an item from your inventory, it leaves the icon for it where you were standing. This game's a mess. There are a couple of items that don't go to your inventory. The most important of these is the earring. This will summon a vehicle that you can fly around in, though your hitbox is still right there, and it extends well beyond the vehicle. If the vehicle somehow gets hit instead of you, then it will explode and you just go on. But because of how you're positioned, it's kind of unlikely for that to happen. If you do die while you're in the vehicle, then it appears immediately when you start again. This game is broken. You can also jump out of the vehicle and abandon it, but there's really no advantage to doing that since you at least double your firepower and maybe, just possibly, can take one more hit. Plus, you can always move faster. Sometimes that's enough to help you get through the stage. The heart, star, and I guess it's a tiara, these items are worth points and get tallied at the bottom of the screen. That tally of items does nothing. The bracelet will make you invincible for about 10 seconds. You'll flash if you're on foot, but if you're in the vehicle, then you'll just have to listen for the music. As for the usable items, there's ingots of the metal that the planet produces. You can put those down and they don't seem to do anything. The manual doesn't say that they do anything either. There are cylinders of poisonous gas. They'll destroy all enemies on the screen. You can also find a gas mask. And if you don't have a gas mask in your inventory when you use the poison gas cylinder, then you die. Also, the only thing you can do while interacting with the gas mask is put it down again. The maze areas have a few more items that you can collect. There are key cards and plastic explosives that are used to destroy doors. And there are discs that you have to collect in order to complete the stage. There's 8 of them on each of these levels. There's also 2 special weapons you can collect. On the regular side-scrolling stages, you've got rocket bullets. They'll pass through enemies, and you get 6 of them after you use it. And in the main stages, you get grenades. And these are so bad that you'll probably die if you try to use them. Something that you'll notice on the second stage is that the high-jumping enemies are indestructible. And since the manual doesn't mention this, I suspect that this one's a bug. On the other hand, this enemy in the main stages is supposed to be indestructible. Or at least the manual says it's indestructible, so I hope it was intentional. Dirty Pair Project Eden has multiple endings, assuming you can make it to the end. No one seems to be entirely sure what the conditions for the different endings are, though. Your score seems to be a likely suspect for having an effect, but it also doesn't seem to be solely based on that. The difference between the endings is what your commander says to you after it's over, so it's not like it was worth anyone's time to go back and figure it out. One more weird secret in the game. If you start playing, and then pause for a little bit more than 20 minutes, this sound effect of a ringing telephone kicks in. So you might not want to walk away from this one for a long time. Shockingly, Dirty Pair Project Eden was not a popular game in Japan, and it doesn't seem to have many fans to this day, except for people who are really looking for a Dirty Pair video game. Since this is pretty much it for Dirty Pair video games. There is one more that was released 10 years later, but it's just a set of pachinko machines. I still suspect it's a better game than this, though. Dirty Pair Project Eden is an awful game. I didn't even really get into how much inertia your character has moving around, something that makes the one-hit kills with the bad hitboxes even worse. Or how the stages don't have checkpoints, so you have to redo them from the start every time you die. Or how the maze stages have some really unclear visual design. I'd play just about any other game than this.